I watched this man just walk over to the trash with a cutting board of steak pieces and just throw away.
Oh,
no, dude.
That poor dog.
Right there, bro. Welcome back to Colors or Crutch. My name is Max Sternberg, also known as Wounded Satellite, and today I'm joined with a new co-host, Jordan Drake, aka SteeledDragon. How you doing today, Jordan?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I got a new foosball table, which something not a lot of people know about me. I got really good at foosball over the last year. I worked at a rock climbing gym that had a tornado storm too. We were spoiled. It was an amazing table. Most people won't know what that means, but it's a dope table. And so I bought a new house and I wanted to have my own. So I got a tornado cyclone too. And me and my buddies carried that shit into the basement today. And it's now set up. And I'm very excited about it because it's dope.
How many games you got to play on it yet?
None. I'm actively upset with my friend because we've been talking about me getting this table in the basement for months. I finally get it. He helps me pick it up in his truck. We carry it downstairs. We set it up and I'm like, cool, let's play. And he goes, nah, bro, I got to bail. I got Mother's Day plans. I'm like, what the fuck? Left immediately. But I will be getting games on it soon. I will be getting a lot of games on it very, very soon. But today we're here to talk about Magic.
Yes,
I've gotten to talk about it. But we're gonna run it back. It's been a while since we've done one of these. So we thought we'd start it off with the top 15 decks in CEDH. Give our own opinionated list again. Rank them for you. Sound good to you?
That sounds awesome.
You want to go first? You want to go second?
Yeah. Why don't you lead it off?
Sure. I think a good place to start is always talking about the perspective that my list is coming from, right? It's not just looking at the stats for the last few months and saying, okay, this is the order that they go. It's kind of an opinionated ranking. And I've done this in different ways before. I've said like, oh, I'm really thinking of best player on that strategy right now, or what the average person can do with it. I'm kind of in the middle right now. I'm considering what a top tier player does with the deck compared to someone of equal skill level. I'm seeing how it's been doing recently for some of them, but I'm also very much coming from the perspective of this is a deck I'm afraid of if I sit at the how do I personally feel about it when I see it across from me? And that's why you might see a couple decks a lot lower than you might expect them to be, and a couple decks a lot higher than you might expect them to be. Number 15 was actually my hardest number to do out of any of them, just because I was really torn in this last slot, and it was between two decks that I think are very, very similar in what they're actually trying to accomplish. And those two decks were Arkham Dagston and Sisay.
Okay.
And you might say that that's really low for Sisay. I do not think Sisay is in a very good spot right now. And Arkham Dagston has actually been doing phenomenal. I did end up deciding on Sisay because I think it does have the higher ceiling as a deck in total, just having access to more colors, a little more diversity in what it's trying to do. I think Arkham Dagston gets away with a little bit more because of Brewer's advantage. But Sisay as a deck right now, what made it so scary and consistent for was it got to be covert. With Dockside, it was out of nowhere, I tutor for Dockside and I'm able to chain those treasure loops together and win the game. And it really lost a lot of that covertness because while there are ways to give your Bloom Tender style effects haste, they're not as plentiful, they're not as consistent, they're not as one card combo-y as the deck used to be. And so from what I've seen out of Sisay in the last few months, it's a lot of very telegraphed gameplay where as long as you're with players that understand what's going on, they very much understand what's going on. And it's difficult to get away with things. And it's difficult to get to that development point where people are actually letting you in the game unless they just kind of miss where you're at and ignore you, or you have a very specific set of sneaky cards in your hand. So I haven't felt this high on the deck lately, but it still is a very powerful strategy that in the right player's hands does extremely well.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think you're right. It is very telegraphed. What you see is what you get. There's really no surprise factor anymore to Sisay. But I do think it has an element of inevitability to it that certain decks still struggle to have. If you let Sisay hang out long enough, it's going to do the thing. It will eventually piece together the strategy that it needs to win. And then ultimately, it's only going to be a deck that gets better and better because more legendaries are going to get printed over time, and those legendaries are going to up the level of that deck. So I feel right now it's in a rough place. Losing Dockside hurt, but I do think it's going to get better as more time comes along. I'm curious to see if Deadpool moves the needle on it at all. Because Rakdos was one of its worst colors, and I'll be interested to see how it comes forward. But I do agree it's probably not anywhere. It's definitely not top 3 where it used to hang out sometimes. Right, but it's still, I think it does have that inevitability factor to it that I still think if you don't pay attention to it and you're not really you're not paying attention to what's going on the board, it can just all of a sudden, hey, you ignored me long enough, I'm winning now.
Right, and that's exactly Sisei's strong suit. It is one of those decks that says, if you do not interact with my board state, I will win the game through it. And the other thing, which you'll see pretty consistently in my deck, I do have a lot of respect for various strategies that win without casting spells, right? Just because we
Right.
are in a Ristic Study meta, that is the primary card. So decks that fall into that category of I'm just activating my abilities to chain through to a win, super, super valid, super, super powerful. What do you got at 15?
All right. So my 15 is Wheelad, Flip Heliod. So what I think is really interesting about this deck right now is it attacks the meta in a way that a lot of people are not ready to deal with. So you draw cards. It's basically how we all kind of churn through this grindier meta. And in a deck that literally is going to prey upon the fact that you are drawing a lot of cards. And then if you draw too many cards, or especially if you've got a wandering out, it just goes right on top of everything you're doing and wins before you're ready to, or set up for it. As soon as that card flips, it is dangerous and it is game on. So one of the things like Max talked about was his philosophy for what cards he put in his top 15. For me, it's kind of the similar situation. It's a mix of what cards do I kind of fear at the table. Like when I sit down and I see these commanders, I'm like, okay, I'm not super comfortable with this matchup, but it's also cards that are doing a little bit well. I did go into the statistics a little bit when I was building my list out, and I think Heliod kind of hits the point for me on both fronts. It's doing really well in the meta right now. I think it's got like a 40% conversion rate or near it, even though it doesn't have a ton of pilots. And then every time I sit down at the table with it, it just if people are not responsible, and a lot of players are not, it's going to run away with the game very, very quickly. And it is a very scary deck. As soon as it flips that commander over and it gets going, it just has a lot of different strategies. It can start wheeling people, it can be patient and just wait it out. Um, and so, because of the diversity of what it can do once it flips and the sheer strength of the commander itself, I think it is a dangerous deck, especially in this format.
Yeah. I mean, Wheeliod was one of the ones I wanted to find a place for it on my list that it didn't quite make it on there. It's one of those decks I've always viewed almost like if you're playing against Slicer, where when you're
Yeah.
against Slicer, it's, oh, this is a Slicer game. Like it completely changes the normal play patterns of CDH. And Wheeliod falls into a similar category. Once they get to a position of having a flipped Heliod, the game has changed. You are no longer playing the same style of regular CDH you're used to
Right.
playing. You have to be so much more considerate of when you're doing anything and when you're drawing a card and when you're tapping out, right? Because they are able to take advantage out of literally any moment. Very
Yeah.
unlike other decks, they always have an active board upon wind. And that is an incredibly powerful strategy. I have a lot of experience against the deck, so I don't feel like I fall for its tricks as much. I mean, basically, don't let him flip a Heliod and don't let him have a Smothering Tithe, and you're kind of fine. Like
but it
outside.
has some brewer's advantage, right? Because there aren't a lot of people who've played against the deck, and so they don't understand quite how dangerous it is. They'll read the flip and they'll be like, "Oh, okay." And even if you explain it to them, like, "Hey, this is everything it's going to do," they go, "Oh, well, it's still Azorius. I think I can hang out and I'm fine." And they're not, they do not understand how dangerous the game just became. And I've seen it happen on more than one occasion where a couple of inexperienced players will feed right into the strategy that it's deploying, and then it'll win right on top of them, and they'll be like, "Oh, what just happened?" And so I think because of that brewer's advantage and the fact that sometimes players are just not super familiar with an Azorius card because it doesn't show up very often, it can be a dangerous deck.
Yeah, incredibly, incredibly powerful. I had a game at Fishbowl casually where a guy had a flipped Heliod and the Smothering Tide got put on the stack, and I tried to explain it to the table. I was like, "Look, this is the card. I know we don't normally counter this right now, but like you really can't let them have this." And guy had the force negation, didn't use it because he wanted to see what would happen, and then we got absolutely
Oh.
obliterated. And he was like, "Oh, you were right."
It's
It
always so good.
happens. It
Yeah.
happens. Coming in at 14, a deck not enough people are playing, but also for some reason in the metas I play with online, too many people play. Lumra. Lumra is a fucking terrifying deck. People do not have the respect they need for this bear. It is crazy how fast and consistent and resilient this deck is. If you can counter the bear when they've sacked all their lands, like cool, you got him. It has those specific moments that you can blow the deck out hard. But when your deck is like 40 to 50 lands and you're just ramping aggressively into this bear on turn 2 that just gives you back even more mana to keep going, and tons of combos in the decks are just through land bases, and then a lot of its pieces have insane resiliency. And that's something you see with weaker combos in CDH, where it's like, oh, I need this specific card and this specific card. And, you can see it happening as they're shooting for those pieces. But Lumra having so many things to do the Lotus Cobra effect, so many things to do the Amulet of Vigor effect. This deck is consistent, resilient, fast, weirdly interactive, weirdly niche, and it scares the shit out of me. It is a deck I'm actually terrified of when I sit at the table, because you need to be able to interact with it. If you cannot interact with Lumra, you are losing on turn 3 every single game, and it's wild. Have you played against it?
Yeah, so it's actually funny you say that. I played against it twice in New York this past, was it this past weekend? No, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. Shoot, time's flying. Either way, the deck got right off the starting block on from turn 1 on, was just a dangerous threat. You're talking about changing the way you see a CEDH table. That deck fundamentally forces you to play it in a completely different axis than you will ever be able to play on before. He got on like Urza's Cave turn 1, and then from there it was just nutty, just complete nutty. Every turn he was shooting up more lands. He was sacking those lands, and then they were all coming right back to Lumra being on the board. And then he'd sack the Lumra, and then at some point an Emrakul came out, and it was like, oh my god, what is happening? I do not know how he escaped that game with a draw, legitimately, because the Lumra player he exploded out the gate and somehow was not able to close. For me, I had that list at like 16, 17. Like, it was close to making my list, because it is a terrifying deck, wildly more consistent than I ever would have expected. Then talk about not casting spells, right? Like you said, it's just interacting with lands, and you're like, what is happening? Over and over again.
That deck's not giving a fuck. And there's like so many incredibly niche interactions in that deck that if you do not have experience against it, you will never see coming.
Oh yeah, no,
you will never see that shit coming.
He runs like 10 lands that I'd never even heard of. I literally was looking at the list afterwards. I was like, I've never heard of at least 4 of these.
Yeah.
Never.
But they're sick, though. It's also probably the best Tabernacle deck in the game.
Yes. Oh, yeah, 1,000.
It's a free sack of your Lumra. You're like, great. Yeah. Like, I'll just keep doing that.
Well, the first time he explained the Zuran Orb line to me, where it's like, oh, I'm going to sack all my lands. I'm like, cool, then your Lumra dies. He's like, yeah, exactly. And then I recast Lumra. And I was like, oh, yeah. That's dumb. That's so dumb.
Yeah.
Who needs
my first ever game against Lumra, I had to mana drain a Zuran Orb. I was like, this is fucking bullshit. I have since acted it. Like that's ridiculous.
Oh, that's terrible. You gotta start running Minor Misstep, right?
Maybe one day that card make a cut. But what made it to 14 for you?
Okay, my 14 was. Well, see, I did not memorize this. Oh, see, this is one I knew you're probably not going to like. But it was Yuriko. Now, I know a lot of people think Yuriko's a bad deck because you run a lot of bad cards in it. But every time I've ever played with it, it is consistent and it is terrifying, because they always seem, at least against me, I don't know if it's just me, but they always seem to hit the flips that they absolutely need to hit. Whether it's the big damage at the beginning of the game to shut out some Necros or Adnauses, or they hit, the Mind Break Trap that they desperately needed to stop something. I just find every time I've ever played against this deck, it gets off the starting block really fast. It's very consistent at what it wants to do. Yuriko is extremely resilient itself, because it just keeps coming back over and over and over again. And there's really not a lot you can do to stop it. You can blow it out, a couple times, and then it just comes right back the next turn. It's in great colors. Dimir means that it can control the game. It runs a crazy amount of control pieces, ones that you would not traditionally see, but because Yuriko wants to hit big flips, they're going to pack them anyway. So you'll see things like Snuff Out, Commandeer, Misdirection, cards that not normal pieces of interaction that you're ready to deal with, but you'll see them at a Yuriko table. And it's kind of another deck that when I sit down, I'm like, okay, I have to reframe my game plan around this deck, knowing that I don't want to see a lot of combat damage coming through, and I've got to be very careful about how Yuriko is going to kind of clear the table and do its thing.
Yeah, I think Yuriko is one of those decks. I have a ton of respect for it, in that the deck I know can interact incredibly well. It's a deck that I know can stop me in a lot of ways. It's a deck that will consistently push through damage and does this all very consistently. And it's a deck I'm afraid of for those reasons. But I've seen Yuriko so many times do exactly what it's trying to be doing, assemble its game plan perfectly, and I almost never see that shit win the game. And so it's always someone sneaking through something. And if they were able to close it out more consistently, I would feel way I guess, better about the deck in terms of ranking it higher. But just with the weaknesses I've seen out of it, if you're cooking on all cylinders and still not winning the game, can't rank you that high. That's my thought with it.
That's fair. And I think it is one really good win con away from being probably a much higher in this list for me. But Dimir just, I mean, they lack win cons, right? You're really stuck on the Thoracle Consult with that deck in particular. I don't think you can justify really any of the other Dimir win cons that you're traditionally looking at.
Yeah, and this transitions us almost perfectly into my number 13. For all the same reasons I just explained about Yuriko is why I have this deck so low. Number 13, I have Glarb, a deck that everyone seems to think is really good and people are really high on in all these ways. But I have never lost to Glarb once in my life, not a single time. I've seen it do the thing, and I've seen it not do great every time. It like I see what it's up to, right? It sets up good advantage engines. It does some good shit. It plays scary cards. Cool, you get Culling Ritual. Oh, you're sort of a Seedborn deck. It's amazing with Valley Floodcaller and Legolas' Quick Reflexes, and it can do a lot of things. And it can be a Doomsday deck or it can be a control deck. It's solid. It's a viable CDH deck that can win games and win tournaments. I just haven't seen it. And I've played against good Clark players. Maybe they just haven't had the good hands for me, but it's a deck that I've felt I can consider. So in terms of the mindset of how afraid am I while sitting across from this deck at a table, I'm not afraid of Glarb. It's a solid deck. It's good. I'm not trying to shit on Glarb. I know people love that deck, but I'm totally shitting on Glarb because I've never lost to that deck.
You don't like his moistness? Come on now. Just the name alone, right? I've heard Ian call him that at least 3 times.
Have I?
No, Ian. I've heard Ian say it.
Yeah. He is moistness, dude.
No, I'd agree with that. Honestly, Glarb reminds me of how Talion started to feel towards the end of, like, right before the bans happened that got rid of Dockside and Jewel Lotus, where it was a deck that would control the table, but it couldn't do enough in time, it felt like, to win as consistently. And it felt like a lot of games it was doing the control thing, it was holding down the fort for as long as it could, and then another deck just raced past it, and it wasn't able to close in time. And so I think there were a lot of, like, Talion and Glarb kind of played along that similar axis to me. Glarb kind of filling that role now that Talion's fallen off. But I very much agree with that. I did not have Glarb on my list at all, spoiler alert. But because I do think, kind of the same thing. It doesn't scare me when I sit down. I hadn't really ever seen it do the thing. The one time I saw it actually execute a Doomsday, the dude whiffed on his Doomsday because there was a counter spell. There's still counter magic out there. Like, basically, the dude let him bait out the Doomsday, and then he just got eaten alive at the end of his Doomsday, and then the guy who did it to him ended up winning that game. So it's just not a deck that I feel. It's weird, right? Because it does a lot of things that I would like it to do. I think Sultide's a very good color pile. I've never seen it do the thing. I don't know why. It just never seems to win when I sit at a table with it or when I'm watching someone play it. And so for me, it just wasn't. I don't think it's a cut above the decks that I've put here.
Yeah. I am the wrong person to be talking shit about Talion too. That deck was fine at winning the game.
But you know what I'm saying, right? Like that pre Dockside ban era, towards the end, it was just getting raced past all the time. It was like if you couldn't set up Talion quick enough, the rock size would just speed right past you every time. The vast we're talking the vast majority of
Rogai on Talion a single time ever.
Hey, I'm talking about the vast majority of Talion pilots, right? The overwhelming majority of them were struggling on that deck towards the end, and you could watch it happen. You'd sit down at a tournament, and you could watch 5 out of the 6 Talion pilots lose game after game after game because I think control is a very hard archetype to pilot correctly, and especially when you've got multiple turbo decks at a table, it makes it even harder to apply it correctly.
Multiple turbo is difficult. The best card really in the late era of the meta on Talion became Damping Sphere. Yeah, I would like really try and get out as quickly as possible. Super, super good at slowing everyone down.
Yeah.
What's your 13?
Oh, okay. So my 13, I've got everyone's favorite dinosaur, Italy, Primal Conquer. The only reason I don't rank this higher, actually, because I think this is one of the most terrifying decks in CDH, is because of inconsistency. Sometimes it's going to hit everything it needs and win the game on the spot. I literally watched it happen in New York this a couple weeks ago when it went off turn 2 and won, right? Like in a top 16. It was crazy. Just gone, done, game over. Thank you, go home. But in a lot of other games, it'll come out, they'll spend all their mana doing everything they can to get it out onto the battlefield, and then they'll whiff. And then they'll sit there for 2 rotations, and they might get another clone, and then they'll whiff again, and then they're out of the game. And I think the consistency of that deck is literally the only thing that holds it back, because it is explosive. It is dangerous when it hits the board. If it hits the right flips, it will close the game down really quickly. And they run every card under the sun to get it out. So, getting it out turn 2, turn 3, not a problem for that deck. And then worst comes worst, you flip it, you start swinging if it comes down to it. And, even that can be very terrifying.
I think we're going to enter the part of this video now where we start withholding some comments for decks that may come up in the future for us. But I think on a real talk, though, Atali was one of those decks that when the bans happened, I was like, oh, this deck's done. Like, in what world is this deck still going to function without Jewel Lotus, Mana Crypt, and Dockside? I was wrong. That deck is cast still.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll withhold some things here. It won't be coming up in too long for me. I got to wait a little bit. At number 12, I have Elsha. Elsha is another one of those decks that I think everyone's aware of the ceiling on it. Snaz is his best pilot. Snaz is absolutely fucking cooking on Elsha and has been cooking on Elsha. And the people who are really, really good with Elsha, you have to be afraid of Elsha, because that is a deck with specific play patterns, specific lines. And if it's allowed to set up and get into that long game, and it gets down its card advantage and it gets down its mana engines, it has Elsha, it becomes weirdly almost unstoppable. Like, not truly unstoppable. It's not like, oh, I can absolutely 3v1 a table until the end, but it almost can. When it's piloted correctly, it's able to weave its way through very complicated endgame game states and find its way to some kind of victory. And it only got better now with Gifts Ungiven. I think that's a huge, incredible upgrade for Jeskai-based strategies. But Elsha is one of those decks that when I do sit down at a table, I am afraid, because almost like what we were saying with Wheelad, where it can happen at any point and they're able to take advantage of any phase of the game, Elsha can do that as well. It has built-in card advantage off the top, and it's just playing so much interaction that it's one of those decks you're afraid to push against, because they're so likely to have an answer for it. And when you're in that kind of loop against decks that win the long game, it's terrifying, because you're just giving them more time to develop and build their situation and set themselves up to be able to win on top of everything. So a ton of respect for Elsha. I wish more people would pick it up and have success on it, because I think I would rank it higher if I saw just a little more out of it from a consistent group of people. But being just Snaz and a few other pilots, I'm going to keep it at 12 for now.
That's fair. This is Elsha the Infinite, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I know there's a few different ones. It's funny. I actually do not see this deck almost ever. No one in our meta really plays the deck. I think the only time I've even watched it be played was when we flew up to Massachusetts at the Royal Rumble, and I think that's the only time I've even ever watched the deck be played. So I don't have like a strong opinion on the deck, just because it's just not a deck I see very often. But when I did watch it Royal Rumble, it did seem good. Like it was doing its thing consistently. I'm not super high on Jeskai piles right now. I think it's just a weird color combination that doesn't seem to lend itself to CEDH very often. It's weird, right? Because you'd think these 3 colors would be really good. There's a lot of good cards in those 3 colors, but the synergies of those decks just doesn't seem to come together as often as you'd like. And I think a lot of them were very Dockside dependent. And I think that shows in Jeskai, just as a whole color pile, that shows in their showing in the tournament statistics since the bans.
I mean, when you bring up inconsistency, what I've said for a long time is the 2 best colors in Magic are actually black and green. And a lot of people don't think about green, but it's because green has this plethora of creature tutors. It enables some very consistent lines with that. And then black is obviously the unconditional side. And with white, blue, red, you're really just getting Gamble, Mystical Tutor, and Lightning Tutor. Not really much beyond that. They're very good, and they're especially good in Elsha. Specifically, I don't know if you're aware, Lightning Tutor is just a one, or Mystical Tutor is a 1-card combo in Elsha, because you Mystical Tutor for Enlightened Tutor for Underworld Breach, Mystical Tutor again for Brain Freeze, Enlightened Tutor again for LED. Like, you do whatever. So it has some really cool lines, but that's really the inconsistency of the deck, is you need to play this dense control package to be able to make sure the game goes long enough that you can find your people.
Right. Yeah. And I we've talked about it, right? Like control, I think it's just a really tough archetype. I think the best decks in the format right now are kind of blending more of a proactive approach with some control elements, but I think pure control decks are really struggling right now.
Definitely. A hard time. Yeah. Hard time to be on pure control. Which is why I cut half the win cons out of rock grass. What do you got at 12 for me?
All right. At my 12, I've got Derevy. So I really like this bird. I think it kind of like he's got the Yuriko effect where Doesn't really matter how much you take him out; he's just going to be right back. You know, he can come in on end step. He's never been cast. Sometimes even killing him just re-enables the combos that they're going for. So sometimes they're better than just him hanging out. But he can be a really dangerous card. I think Cradle decks are really strong right now. You're going to see quite a few of these on my list. And this is probably the OG Cradle deck in a lot of ways. Some of the strategies that implements, you know, the joke of the turbo ring strategy with the one ring is very much a thing for Derevy. Can abuse that card very quickly and get out of hand. And I think it's a deck that is getting enabled more and more as strategies have come out. It lost a little bit with the banning of Nadu, but in what it's gained since like Bright Steel Colossus or Bright Steel Gearhulk, I think maybe it's Bright Steel Gearhulk, right? Is the new card that just came out that's really put that card back over the top. Every time I've seen it, it's been very dangerous. It seems to be a card that people sleep on in games, and they're not really. It's got a lot of moving parts that people are not necessarily paying attention to, and then all of a sudden it's winning. It's adopted some of the Rock Thrash tech with like Aurora Breeze color that I've seen lately. And it's just a deck that it's very consistent. It's going to do the things. Bant's a good color pile right now. And I really like the deck. I really like what it's doing, and I think it's got a good place moving forward. And I think it's only going to get better.
Yeah, Derevy's good. Bant as a generic strategy has just gotten a lot better. I do have a Bant deck on here. I actually do not have Derevy on my list. It's one I looked at. It's one I consider. Derevy's super solid, but it's another deck I've just I don't think I've ever lost to. Like I've seen it so many times, and I've seen it fire in all cylinders and just not close out the game. And the real reason is card advantage is better than mana advantage. Derevy is primarily a mana advantage card when you look at how it functions on tapping your lands and stuff, and it needs that card advantage to push forward. So obviously the ring, incredible with Derevy. Giving it Nadu was incredible to Derevy. But losing out on not if you don't have that stuff accessible to you, cool, untap your cradle 3 times, make 20 mana. I don't care.
Right.
What are you doing? So they're definitely, I think Bright Glass Gearhulk was a really good inclusion for them. Letting them just get a Mystic Remora and something else was super, super good. But it's not a deck I'm super afraid of.
I would say Nature's Rhythm also was a big boon for them.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it was a big boon. It was a big boon for a lot of green decks, but I think especially cradle heavy decks. In a deck like Derevy, where it really only needs to tutor twice and then it's winning. So,
no, Derevy is sick. That's one I maybe should have had, but did not have.
I'll be curious to. I think I know which band that you picked, and that one was probably also close to mine. But we'll see deeper into this, right?
We're not quite on Bant yet. We're actually dipping back into Esper for number 11. And number 11, I have Tivet.
Okay.
Tivet is a deck that I think a lot of people feel like was donezo because they're like, oh no, Jeweled Lotus, no mana grip, it's too slow. Tivet already wanted to play a slow game plan. That's like actively what it wants. And so everyone's slowing down and just trying to build advantage engines till Tivet can get out Tivet. They're like, okay, like this is fine, honestly. I think Tivet will take not having to lose on turn 2 most of the time to having a longer game where they're slightly slower and getting out Tivet. And it's felt really good right now. It's a deck I've seen picked up a lot more lately. It seems that people are really coming back to Tivet. It's still a deck I don't feel I lose to very often, but it's an Esper deck that solves the Esper problem of not being able to win the game by just having time sieve with their commander. The same way you look at, Malcolm Vog compared to Rogai, just looking at it gets Glenhorn as well, those types of things. I think Tivet's really good. Like I think it is in a very, very good place right now where people need to be afraid of it and they need to show it respect. And if you just let Tivet grind, it's going to outgrind you because they also still play all of the same Mothering Tide, Ristic Study, Esper Sentinel, Mystic Remora engines, but then they also get a mana and card advantage commander on top of it all. And yeah, they're slightly worse away in the game than some other things, but then they're slightly better because they get the 1-card combo. So it's a deck everyone knows and everyone's used to and everyone knows what it does, but it just feels like it's back to being in a good place right
now. Oh, I can see that. I don't know. Maybe I feel like Tivet's fallen off a lot from where it's not a deck that scares me. I think it's very slow. It's very in your face about what it's going to do. There's no surprise with the deck almost ever. Right. I mean, right. Every once in a while you get a Thorkel consult that comes down. You're like, oh, I wasn't ready for that. But you can expect that out of all Esper decks, right? So I just don't feel like the 1-card win con is as dangerous as it used to be. I don't know why, but it just doesn't feel like when you play against the deck that it's ever a shock what it's doing. It's very linear in its game plan. It's always going for it one way or the other, but it doesn't seem to have the recovery mechanism that you want in place to kind of bounce back, right? If Tivet goes down hard, it feels like the deck struggles to climb back into the game in a in enough time to where it can then close the game back out. Also, I've seen Time Sea on more than one occasion now screw people in tournaments. You'll get into those final turns, those final minutes, and you can't actually close the game in time because you went to final turn. And I think that is something to be said about that, especially for tournament play, right? When we're talking about the best decks for tournaments, that does seem to struggle to close those games out. And the amount of times I've seen players and peers when they've gone to time, they put down the time seed and they're just not thinking because they're just so used to that linear line. And like, no, that's just game, buddy. Like, it's over. You don't get infinite turns now. Less of a problem if you're top 16 and top 4, right? You're just going to go off and win anyway. But winning those Swiss rounds is really important, and I think Tivet lends itself more to drawing games lately that I've seen rather than winning. And it's going to be hard to convert with that shell. I think it's so reliant on external pieces to actually win the game because its commander is so expensive and is a dangerous target for like cloning and some other stuff that they're not casting it as an engine or a value piece. A lot of times they're just kind of casting it as a closer. And I think that's one of the worst things you can be doing with your commander right now.
That's fair. I don't think Esper with Tivet specifically struggles to win the game. One of the things you said. I do think their weakness is really mana production. That's always been kind of Esper's weak spot. You don't get the ritualistic parts of green or of red. You don't get your mana dorks in green. So you're kind of sitting in this place of, I need my Dark Rituals and Cabal Rits to be good, and then I need my commander or something like Urza to give me, or Smothering Tithe to help me out in that regard. And you are very slowed down if you don't have that, because they get into these positions where, okay, cool, you drew 20 cards, but you can't utilize them all. And it's unfortunate to build back in that way. So that's fair. Well, I'm afraid of it, but that's probably because it plays hate pieces for everything I've ever played.
You're not wrong. It's also one of the few decks that can play Curse Totem, right? And any deck that can play Curse Totem is going to be a powerhouse.
What do you got, number 11?
From my number 11, I have Teish Thrasios, which I talk about a deck that I thought was dead post Dockside, right? Losing Jeweled Lotus, losing Mana Crypt, not Dockside, but that ban era. But losing those two cards specifically, I thought, kind of put this deck dead. There's better, more efficient ways to do kind of what everything that Teish Thrasios was doing, I thought. With Rockgrass can kind of play the Great Up line better. TNT can play some of that mid-range play just a little bit better. But I think Teish Thrasios has actually carved out a niche for itself in the meta currently. And it's become dangerous again. The Enduring Vitality has proven to be a staple for that deck. Turning the Thralls into mana production has then allowed them to kind of get online. The rituals that Black already had, because I've heard this argument before, and I think I started to agree with it, but Black is truly the real color of speed, not red. And you kind of see it with some of the stuff that this deck can do by actually being able to power out its commander relatively early without much of an issue. This is a Cradle deck in the same vein as Rockgrass, and so it plays along a very similar axis. But what it lacks in that kind of quickness that Rockgrass has, it's very consistent. It's going to get to where it wants to go. It's still at a very good clip, right? I think it's a much faster deck than Thras Yoshi, which is Yoshimaru, which is the other 3-color Cradle deck. And I think this one it's explosive, it's consistent, and it is very dangerous, and it can attack on an axis that Rockgrass can't. Right, a Curse Totem doesn't shut this deck down necessarily. You'll just start drawing cards through Teish instead, and I think that makes the deck very interesting in the format right now.
I'm just terrified of any deck that gets to play Culling Ritual.
I fucking hate Culling.
Oh, I love that card. I love that card.
You don't cast it against me ever.
No, never, not once.
Feel mad you didn't post the game that we had a resolved Culling Writ Deluge just overloaded Cyclonica.
Dude, there was no world, right? 5.5 hours. I looked at it. It was 5.5 hours of legit footage I was gonna have to cut down. No fucking way.
Tell us in the game. Tell us in the comments if you would like to see a 5.5 hour gameplay video with more board wipes than you'd ever fucking believe. This shit took forever, but it's gas as fuck. No, Teish Thrasios is a super good deck. It is a resilient deck. It's almost, I feel like every time I played against it, I don't have too many games against it post-ban, but maybe it's too good at winning the game is the issue that I've found with it, because while other Simic-based strategies are really focused on building up these advantage engines and grinding, and that's really their strength, is being able to get these I'm not winning the game. I'm just creating value situations onto the table. And you can politic those really well in current CDH to have them. And that lets you go over the top of people, become insurmountable, do that kind of shit. But because of the inclusion of black, this deck can so directly win the game a lot that I see a lot of pilots just try and win the game as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And it's done in an unresilient way, and they don't have silence effects, and they don't have a way to really protect the situation. And so I see them just get blown out a lot. Kind of been my experience with this Sultai pile. I'm sure there's other pilots play a different way. I'm sure it is a very powerful deck that it is definitely one I have respect for when I sit down at the table. But I think people have been too aggressive with it from the experience of seeing, rather than leaning harder into the systemic aspects.
I would agree with that. I think the most successful pilots that I've seen have been pilots that are doing the more kind of the raw grass strategy, right? They're going to grind the game out. They're going to accrue a ton of value off the cradle, and then they're going to basically slam the door shut on you because they just got so much mana, so much card advantage that there's nothing you're doing that's stopping them. But the games where I've seen this deck struggle are exactly as you say, right? It's they slam win as quickly as possible, or they're going for like an early necropotence, and then they're trying to necro off. And I wondered if the deck is just better built as a Sultai mid-range pile. You drop nods, you drop necro, you drop all that the fast mana stuff. I think there's better decks for that, and just try to lean in on the cradle package with the consistent win lines. And just if the deck would perform higher level than that. I'd be curious to see that long term.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a specific play style and mindset to just be like, I'm not trying to win the game. I'm just trying to grind. And I mean, that's what I love to do. But I think it's something that people struggle with because a lot of people see the pathway to winning the game and just say, well, I'm going to shoot this shot at some point. Might as well be now.
Yeah. You can argue, right? That's a struggle literally for most pilots is it's understanding the window and going for it at that right time. I think black just seems to lend itself to, hey, I've got it. I'm going.
Right. Oh, I can get the piece I need. That's great. I'm building 8 plus Ds. I can go get the piece. It definitely helps. It definitely helps. Going into the top 10, though, you might not like this one. The deck you seem to not have enough respect.
Okay.
But at number 10, I have a Tali Primal Conquer. I don't like. How would you? The craziest thing to me was you said the weakness of the deck is that it's inconsistent. How is it inconsistent if it's constantly winning games? It's incredibly consistent in that this thing makes mana and will get out of Tali. It is inconsistent in what cards it will get from its opponents, sure. But the consistency of it doesn't matter what fucking cards it gets because normally it's good enough to just win the game. That's there. That's what the deck does. And Tali is insane. Also, shout out to Cam from Ohio who's been fucking cooking people.
Yeah, it's not that I don't. I think when I say consistency, right, it's the consistency of the cards that you're hitting off of other people's decks. Like I want to be really clear about that because you're very much banking on your opponents having high quality cards, and so there is a point in time, like if you struggle in those first couple rounds and you start dropping deeper into the tournaments and you start seeing maybe some more off meta decks, some decks that you're not quite familiar with, the card quality then starts to drop tremendously. And so I think Itali, maybe more so than almost any other deck in the format, is very motivated to win that first 1 or 2 games because I think their crawl back into, getting back into top 16 then becomes a much more of a struggle as the deck quality drops in these bigger events. You take it to like a 120 person event. Let's say the bottom 40 players are playing, some really off meta stuff. Your card quality is dropping tremendously, right? You even playing something like I don't know, something like Minskimbu, right? Like let's just go like super off meta Naiad Minskimbu. The card quality drops off so hard in that, right? That you're just like, I'm still hoping to hit value stuff, but the deck's not necessarily designed or set up to win off of those type of cards. You're trying to prey on the blue farms, the rock grasses, the TNTs, decks that have very high quality cards that are going to consistently do what you want them to do, and they're going to be good in every situation that you flip them into.
Absolutely honored that you Rock Grass was a deck full of high card quality cards. I'm so gonna fucking laugh when they flip my goddamn Ouroboros Green color.
Hey, if you laugh, right? I'm pretty sure don't they run Talent Gates though too? And Cradle? That'd be funny, right? They loop on you.
Sure, but what do they do with infinite mana? Nothing.
I don't know. Do the same thing they were going to do anyway.
Yeah, like Atali's backup plan. That's the thing, right? Like the way the deck is built, it's lots of ways to make more Atalis.
Right.
So even if your first Atali spin or trigger doesn't give you what you need, right? It's still going to get you value that often pushes you towards the next. That's really the trend deck.
Well, and that's the hope, right? But then if you whiff on that first clone, and then your card draw is very, there isn't a lot of card draw. So then you're really hoping that you're going to fish out that next clone. And so if you're not setting up the line correctly, or you're not playing it in the way that it's meant to be played in terms of like, I need to go from clone to clone to clone and not sit here for 2 rotations doing nothing until I can hit the next clone. Because every rotation that you're missing in a Tali trigger is a rotation that you might just lose.
All I know is land Orcish Lumberjack LED is a snap keep, and that's
that is a crazy snap keep. I just want to be very clear on that. That is all in. You better hope those 3 cards you hit, those 4 cards you hit.
I would snap on a tally. I'm snap keeping that every single fucking time.
Oh, God.
What do you have at 10? What do you have at 10 after disrespecting the 9?
So my number 10 is Sisay. So we talked about this one a little bit. I think the inevitability factor of Sisay still is very prominent. I think this is also a deck that just people have not really adapted to the post-ban era. Like, I very strongly believe that people are still trying to just stick on the lines that worked in that pre-Dockside era. And I don't think there's been a lot of experimentation on this deck. And that's just my personal opinion. But I think there is room for experimentation with this deck. I think there are some builds that are just not explored that are potentially still out there that this deck could still do the thing. Legendaries are going to keep getting printed, and they're only going to go up in quality, and it doesn't really seem to matter, that this is a deck that's going to continue to get better on those. I just think over time, it is a deck that will increasingly become dangerous again, because it's only a matter of time before better legendaries are printed for it. I think right now it's still very consistent on what it does. Like we talked about in the beginning, it's telegraphed, but it's consistent. And it really only takes 10 treasures in the right build to just win the game on the spot, or 10 colored mana. So I think that's still something to keep in mind. There's not a lot of decks that can win by just having 10 mana and there's no interaction. There's very little interaction that you can even do at that point to stop it.
I think if your name is not Malcolm Jeremy, the deck is fucking ass. I don't know. Like that's it. In my opinion, you're not one of those 3 people right now. I guess if Ian put it back together, I'd probably give Ian respect on Seth. He was also as in on Dockside as humanly possible. Dang it, loves Dockside. I don't know.
There's no reason not to be an on Dockside, right? I mean, dumb card.
Oh, it was the way to do it. He is just a lover of the little goblin, what he is. But no, I don't know. There's a few pilots who are still really cooking with the deck, and I absolutely. And their skill set isn't just playing Sisay better; it's politicking somehow evading the ire of the table. They're allowed to develop up, and they're really good at that. Malcolm is probably the best at being covert. It's something I really noticed from his gameplay when I see him. He's super good at just keeping the eyes off of him and sneaking through like a Teferi Tyvar Bloom Tender style line types of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Which is really important for like he's able to look not threatening where people think, oh, we don't have to worry about Sisay right now, and then congratulations on won the game. And that's the thing I think a lot of people struggle with is finding those pathways towards victory.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
At number 9, we're sticking in a very similar color pie to my last one here. We're gonna go with Magna. Magna's a good deck, bro. I don't know. It's not a deck I lose to that often. I will still give it that compared to but more so than the other decks have been like, oh, I've never lost this deck. I have lost to Magna. And Magna's incredibly good at doing the same thing that we've talked about with decks like Sisay, where, oh, it's on board, you can kind of see it coming. But it does it so much quicker and so much more resiliently and so much harder to stop. Because if you kill Magna, it kind of just comes right back and no one cares. And no one really wants to interact with your shitty little curves. And treasures are really easy to make in that deck. And it's also gotten at least one completely relevant new card from like every single goddamn set recently, where the deck just keeps getting better. I mean, they got another artifact dwarf. They got another, thing to tutor for. They got another combo piece. They got another removal spell that makes a bunch of tapped treasures. Like, they just keep getting all these random cards that only work in Magna, and no one knows these cards. And it's a deck you need respect for because, when I look at a deck like, what's a good example here? If we're talking about a deck like Lumra, right? where we're talking about like, oh, you need a piece of interaction for them. Magna, one piece of interaction really doesn't seem to cut it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, right? I actually have Magna up pretty high on mine. Suki's joining the party.
It was just he. I want.
But yeah, no, I would agree. I actually have Magna much higher on my list, so I'll talk about it when I get to mine. But funny enough, you talk about they get a new card every set. I think I just saw there's a Spine of Ishtar replacement. That just came out. It's like an enchantment.
The Saga Dragon.
Yeah, that thing is crazy.
Saga Dragon's sick.
All right, so my number 9. This is actually a deck that I think is really cool, but it is Ral Monsoon Mage. And this deck, I think if you've played against it, you know how terrifying it is. It just goes completely nuts. It's off the walls fast. Probably we've actually discussed this a lot in our chat, but it's one of the few turbo decks that is still consistently just terrifying. It Ral goes really good in the 99 of some other turbo decks. But it's very, very strong on its own. The reason I really like this card too is if you've watched my other channel, we've seen that we talked a lot about Ruby Storm and how fun that was for Modern. And this card was a big part of that strategy, and I think it translated very well to CEDH. Though it's just very consistent on what it wants to do. It's gonna flip on you, and when it does, the Planeswalker side is devastating on what it can do to the board and how quickly it ends games. I mean, just getting loyalty counters the way it does, it's absolutely bonkers. What was Wizards thinking? But again, it is probably one of the few decks where it makes my butthole pucker a little bit when I see it. I'm like, okay. I'm mulling for interaction, and hopefully we get the interaction before he goes nuts. So, and it's a deck that still has Brewer's Advantage because there are not a lot of players who played against this deck yet and don't understand when they see it at the table how quick it's going to go.
Brewer's Advantage, absolutely. I think that is a huge part of where it's at right. It definitely is a deck where it's like, oh, just mull to have a counterspell and you're probably fine. I always do that anyway. So I think my limited experience against Ral is like, just counter the wheel. Why do people let them have the wheel? They always talk people like, you want this wheel, and people let them have the wheel. Just don't let them have the wheel, and suddenly they can't do anything. It's great. It's really not difficult. It is only an Izzet deck. It's not Grixis. So they're limited to Izzet. Don't let them gain card advantage, and it's really fine. They also only play like 19 lands. So if you kill Ral, it's super hard to get back. Like,
just crazy. It is one of the only decks that has 100% conversion rate over the last month. And it's got multiple pilots, right? This isn't just one person that's winning on it. It's got a bunch of different people who are doing very well on this deck. So I'll be curious to see if it stays a monster or if it's gonna, like what you said, if it's gonna get figured out and kind of have like the Winota issue, right? Where eventually people just figure, just kill it and it never comes back and it does the thing and you're fine.
Not it right. These Ral stats. Let's look over the last 3 months. What do we got here? I mean, yeah, pretty good, right? One third of its entries has converted of the 9 that there are. It's a respectable rate. It's definitely a respectable rate. No, Ral is something I have respect for. Kevin Simmons, Barracks, got me on that deck very, very early on when he first started brewing it. It was like, this is absolutely terrifying, and you need to see how this works. And I was like, okay. And he showed me, and it was cool. It does a lot of things really, really well.
Yeah.
At number 8, we enter the partner realm finally. Finally got there. At number 8, I put Yoshidrass, aka Bad Rock Grass. This is a deck I have a ton of respect for in that it is wildly resilient, makes a shitload of mana, just activates Thrasios, is super good in all of his axes. It can still interact with you, it can still silence you, it can protect itself with silence effects. The big thing holding me back from this deck feeling like it's going to take that step forward into the upper echelon, which I feel like it has the potential to do, is having some sort of resilient win con that doesn't require it having a board save. Because it really feels to me like this is a deck that I'm just going to board wipe you when you are so cooked. And yes, you can rebuild, and yes, it can sometimes rebuild quickly, but it is a deck that is so weak to onboard interaction that I worry for it. It's incredibly built around Cradle. It's even more built around Cradle than Rogthras, but not having the backup plan of winning with Song of Creation or winning with Underworld Breach or some way to push yourself forward without having this absurd visible board state is the thing that really holds me back for the deck. It's also just a half step slower, white versus red, when comparing the two, because obviously they're very comparable. Where yes, you get the silence effects, and yes, you get Grand Abolisher, and yes, you get Cutzel, and yes, you get Ranger Captain, and you get Aspher for some more card advantage. Like all those things are really, really powerful, but you're already a deck that is forced to spend time setting up. And I think it's more important to be able to set up quickly and interact quickly. And this is a deck that struggles in if it does not have board state, it will never win the game. And it also plays somehow way less interaction than you ever expect it to play, right? If I'm playing a BAMP strategy, I want to be able to stop you really effectively. And every time I played against Yoshi Fest, that player has zero interaction at any point of the game to help with anything. They just have creatures. Doesn't help.
It's funny you say that. I literally saw a Yoshi Thras list. I think it was from Europe. They were running 0 counter spells. They were just like, I'm all in on it. I was like, that's just crazy. They're like, I'm just going to play creatures and hope that no one board wipes, I guess.
Funny.
Yeah, I had Doc Thras like if we'd have done an honorable mention, I had Doc Thras as my honorable mention. I think the deck is cool. I don't think it's better than I think it is the worst of the Thrasios pairings that include white and blue. Right? Or blue, I guess, right? I think it's worse than Tevish Thras right now. I think it's worse than Rog Thras. I think it's worse than TNT. It's better than Bruce Thras. But again, I just don't know. I guess the issue I've had with it is I just don't know what dropping the black really gets you. It gets you a somewhat more focused Cradle plan, I guess, but you lose consistency, you lose explosiveness, because I think even TNT can be more explosive than Dog Thras. I think you hit it right off, the nail on the head, right? Like it's very vulnerable to board wipes. Its win cons seem all over the place in terms of like, how am I going to cleanly win this game? Like you're very all in on the Ouroboros plan. Which is fine, but you don't have the board. I just don't feel like you have the right colors to come back from a board wipe. We talk about coin ritual, right? Like I don't see the deck being a very resilient deck. It seems very fragile for a board state strategy. It kind of reminds me of like a Nagila deck, where it's like it's very all in on what it wants to do and on that plan, but as soon as that plan gets stopped, it's just dead in the water and there's no comeback. But at least Nagila had the turbo aspect to it. Doc Thras doesn't even have that. It's just there.
Yeah, it's the deck. I'm just gonna worm. It does not. But it is super powerful.
If it is allowed to get going, like when that deck decides to win the game, it is even more resilient at winning the game than Rog Thras is, just because of silence effects. Being able to slam down Abolishers, Ranger Captains, and everything is so good. So it is a scary deck. It is a deck I am afraid of when I sit against it at table, because I know how explosive it can be and I know how resilient. And the decks I'm playing right now do not play board wipes.
Yeah. The issue I've always had with it still comes down to me. Maybe this is just because I play too much TNT, but at the end of the day, I just would rather have the 2 extra pips on Tymna. I think it just gives you a better strategy. And that's the issue I always have with the deck.
But I think going back to what we said on Tevish Thras, where the addition of black sometimes make people too proactively attempt to win the game rather than just build their advantage engines, which I've seen you be a greedy shit and do that too, for sure. But I think you're good enough to know when it's like, I'm just getting Aristic here. I'm just going to vibe. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do. All right. So from number 8, I have Malcolm Vile. So I played probably against this deck more than maybe any other human on the planet, because my wife loves this deck. It is her baby. If you've ever played against Lily, you know who she is. If you play Malcolm Vile, so I have a lot of experience with this deck. It is one of the decks that I think for a Grixis shell. I think it is in a lot of ways a little bit more resilient than the Rockside plan, because you can basically set up a very quick Glinthorn win, and then if the Glinthorn win goes wrong for whatever reason, it actually has better pivot pieces and more mid-range value pieces that allow it to extend into that mid game and even into the late game and be able to win still. It is a deck that doesn't necessarily scream resilience, but it actually has a lot more of it than you'd expect. And then it still has a lot of explosivity. So the fact that it can kind of blend those two worlds really nicely together in a way that I think a lot of decks really struggle with makes it dangerous. And when I sit at the table, I know I have to mulligan for quick interaction. Kind of you have to do that for all Malcolm decks that have red, but like that deck specifically, because of the black, just gets it so fucking consistently. It is obnoxious. It is annoying. And the amount of times I've seen people lose to a turn 2 or 3 Glithorn while Willie's playing it is incredibly high, including myself. I lose that deck probably more than any other deck in the format, just because I play against her so much. And she knows my play style in and out. It is annoying.
One day. That deck. That day is yet to come. That day is yet to come, dude. I have had the answer for Glithorn every fucking time, but one day that day will come.
Dude, it's just one piece removal, right? It's like it's usually done, but
Turns out when you get to fall back into Ad Nauseam, Breed, Necropotent, Oracle on top of you, just like commander-based win con, the deck's pretty resilient. That can do a lot of things. That can do a lot of things right now. I actually have to wait to talk.
Okay.
Lily's gonna be way happier with me.
Oh no.
At number 7, I have a deck you know very, very well. I have Marne's Cowger. And this is one I can't quite explain, because every time I look at Gold Sabertooth's list, I'm like, what the fuck is this man doing? Like, what is he cooking up here? It doesn't make sense. But when someone is consistently doing that well with a strategy and just dunking on people consistently that hard with a strategy, you have to put respect on it. And what's so funny is, from what I've seen of his play style, and it might just be a little bit of bias from how he beat me, I think a lot of people see Marneus and they're expecting this slower, almost Elsha style to it, of like, oh, you have to get down the Smothering Tide in the commander and you have to build toward the thing. But that's not how Marneus is. He's just casting Thoracle on turn 3 a lot of games and getting people. And when he doesn't cast Thoracle on turn 3, then he goes into the Marneus plan. And there's so many options for that, where it is a hyper card advantage focused strategy. It is a hyper mana advantage on board strategy. It can deal with the board well. It can interact well. It can win the game well. It's in this like weirdly awesome position in the meta right now. I haven't seen too many other pilots cook with it. I have seen a lot of people try it. I've heard some people say they think the deck is ass, and some people are like, oh, he figured it out. Like, there's a lot of mixed emotions there, but I mean, I got cooked by it. And that's something I wasn't able to say for a lot of decks on this list so far. So Marneus at number 7. I'm a believer.
Yeah, I actually have Marneus higher up my list, so I am also a believer. And I'll talk about it when I get there. But spoiler alert, this was my pet deck for a long time before I switched to TNT. So I have a lot of thoughts on this deck in particular, but we can get to those.
I mean, a big part of how we originally met was me coaching with Marneus.
Yeah, exactly. God, I wanted that deck to work so bad in the Dockside era, and it just, ugh. The best thing that ever happened to that deck is Dockside being banned. 1000%.
I think you mean the best thing that ever happened to Tivet, but yeah.
That's both, right? I mean, seriously. Esper strategies in general just took off.
Oh, yeah. Without Dockside, they got so much more powerful, because they couldn't just get got as easy.
Right, yep.
What do you got number 7?
All right, so for my number 7, this is going to be the hot take of hot takes right here, but I have Rogai pretty low here. So number 7, Rogai. My reasoning is I still think the deck can do the thing it was always good at. It can still win on turns 1 and 2 if you're not careful, but I think it is a significantly more glass cannon strategy than it used to be. And the amount of times where the pilot will just blow themselves out turn 2 and then sit there, I think has been dramatically higher since the Dockside ban. It lost a lot of the resilient pieces. I think it was very all in on sometimes on that Dockside strategy, because then it let them kind of push into a Ristic Study if they needed to. And a lot of games, you just don't really see it anymore. I think Necropotence and Adnal strategies are also just not as strong anymore. I think you're very much like trying to hit kind of this very narrow window, and I think the probabilities would probably check out on this as well. But you're trying to hit these very narrow probabilities, like I'm going to hit all the pieces that I need. I don't have really an outlet for the Dockside that I used to have, and I don't really even have like a very strong, like, here's my mana game if things go south on my Nas or on my Necro that I can pivot into. So a lot of games, I just see this deck kind of muddle about a little bit and then just lose. Unless people are playing very, very irresponsible, and then it's like, oh, okay, I can send it turn 2 and I win. But it just doesn't seem to happen as much for this deck anymore. I think it's very inconsistent. The good pilots are still very good on it, like they've always been, which is why I still have it decently high. But I don't think I believe in its long-term viability over other decks right now, unless something changes dramatically, like it gets a new card or something shifts in the meta. But I just think it's going to get itself blown out more often than not as it stands today.
Very, very valid. Rogai is a deck that post-ban, it was trying to do the same thing it was always doing. And it was the fastest deck in the format from a lot of perspectives because it didn't really care about the loss of Mana Crypt Jeweled Lotus Dockside as much because the deck is just enabling Rog to make mana. And then everyone was like, cool, just keep a piece of interaction against it and it's donezo and it gets blown out. And that worked. And a lot of people stopped playing Rogai and it really, really fell off. As we will soon talk about, I think Rogsai's back. And I think Rogai is back because everyone is in this mindset of my entire goal in this game is to get out Ristic Study and Advantage Engines and grind. And they're not keeping hands that are interaction based. They're not keeping hands that are, I'm going to stop someone. They're keeping hands that are, I'm going to build and work on myself. And that's greedy as fuck. And when everyone is in that mindset, I'm going to slam a Necro on turn 2, and there isn't that much you're going to be able to do about it. And I think that that's the position Rogai is in right now. And I very much am expecting Rogai's no.
I can see that. I can definitely see that. I just think if you have even one responsible player in the pod who holds their piece of interaction for it, it just seems to die on the vine every single time. I've not seen a game where someone held a piece, countered the first like big Rogai thing it tried to do, and then watched the deck come back from that at all. The only time I even saw the deck be competitive in a game post-ban was they landed like a turn 2 Ristic Study and then kind of rode that throughout the game to like stay in the game, but they still didn't win, right? They still lost to the T&K pilot that was also at the table. And it was just a game I was watching from the sidelines because mine had already ended. I think that was like such a good stamp on like why Rogai sometimes struggles right now. It's just like you try to play the mid-range game, you're going to lose. You try to play the turbo game and someone's got the interaction, you lose. And so there's just it's just a very narrow window of like, I either hit it right here or I'm just losing the game. But I am curious to see like the wrong side build has been really popular lately. And I've seen that pick up. I'd be curious to see if like that changes the numbers, but I think as of this recording, it's too soon to say.
Wrong side is more of a thing now. When I say Rogai Silas, I'm talking about full turbo.
Oh yeah,
I'm gonna Necro you turn 2 Rogai. I'm talking about it.
That's still the one I see.
Yeah,
that's like 99% of the one I see.
Yeah, I mean, Rogai is pretty much just saying I'm going to get down card advantage. Like that's their purpose, just to get down card advantage, and they do it really, really well because rather than being a Rogai deck that's so proactively built that can just land a Ristic Study and use that to grind a little bit, they're entirely devoted to card advantage. So they will always have it and they will always get a lot of it. That's kind of the Rogai gist, which I guess I wasn't even considering that in my ranking, but I guess I'd still keep it exactly where I have it.
Yeah.
Which brings us to my number 6. And I'm also going to talk about my number 5 here. I kind of want to bring them together for a little bit. My number 6, I have Malcolm Vial Smasher. And then my number 5, I have Rogai. And they're very, very similar decks. They're both Grixis strategies. They're doing mostly the same thing. So I do just kind of want to talk about them together. Going into Malcolm Vial first, the advantage it has over Rogai is resilience. As you've kind of stated, like being able to just glint horn people, having this entire other option game is incredibly powerful. Like that is such a strong thing to be doing. And I think it's a legitimate reason to be playing Malcolm Vial over Rogai. And I think that it is the reason that in recent history, Malcolm Vial has been doing better than Rogai. But if I'm saying which deck I am more afraid of and which deck I think is overall more powerful and more set up in the meta to win right now, I'm taking Rogai over Malcolm Vial because the enablement of Rog cannot be understated. There's decks like Rogthras where when I play Rogthras, it's, oh, cool, my Kratos turned on turn 1, my Deflecting Swat and Fierce are turned on, my Flare of Duplications turned on. That's cool. When you look at Rogai as a deck, on turn 1, you have immediately getting the maximum amount of value out of Deadly Relic, Fierce Guardianship, Deflecting Swat, Flare Duplication, Culling the Weak, Infernal Plunge, Jeska's Will, like all of these cards that deck is taking advantage of. The true Turbo Grixis strategy is built around the enablement of Rogai. And it's impossible for any other Grixis strategy to purely compare on the speed axis that can bring to the table. And because of that, it makes its turn 2 Necros better because it turns on so many more things. You know, having Mox Amber be a legitimate Mox is so powerful. So I'm way more afraid of Rogai. I love the resiliency of Malcolm Vile. It's a deck I have a ton of respect for. I'm sure I'll get cucked by it someday. It hasn't happened yet. But Rogai is a deck I have lost to maybe more than any other deck in CEDH. Like that, I've been playing against Rogai for years now, and it is absolutely terrifying. And it is a deck that requires me to change my mulligan, right? If I'm in a pod of just a bunch of mid-range decks and I see a great advantage-based hand, I'm super happy to keep it. But if I'm against Rogai and it's like, oh, my hand is making a bunch of mana to start activating Thrasios on turn 3, like that's not going to cut it in that matchup ever. And I'm forced to mull these hands that are otherwise super keepable, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, and I 1000% agree with you. Right, there's a reason like I have Rogai higher than Malcolm Vile for the exact same reasons you said. I think out of all decks in the format, there probably is not a deck that is scarier to sit down across the table from than Rogai, because you just don't know how quick it's going to go in that game, especially if they're in seat 1 or 2. It is a terrifying prospect, and you can't rely on the fact that are your opponents actually going to keep a responsible hand, or are they going to be greedy, right? So you always are kind of mulling when you are debating your mulligan decisions. It is a deck that you have to find interaction for, because you just can't rely on the table also being able to find it. But then that sets you back on your strategy, and then it makes the game kind of it changes the way the game played. Like we talked about this at the beginning, certain decks change your mulliganing decisions and then change the way you have to approach that game, and it makes it feel less like a normal CEDH game. And Rogai may be the preeminent deck to that decision tree that you have to make at the very beginning of the game. And I 1000% agree with you, Max. Like there's no world in which like I'm not sitting against a Rogai player and I'm like, okay, I've got a mulligan for interaction. As greedy as I've been at times, there's no world in which I'm like, yeah, we're fine, we're good. Somebody else can handle that shit.
I've seen you do that when I'm at the table.
I've seen you just say something else.
Okay.
That shit when I'm at the table.
When certain players sit at the table, like the guy who's always like, I go for interaction every time. I'm like, sick. I don't got to do shit.
That's why when I'm against even a Rogai player, I purposely don't mull for interaction. I say, if you're gonna lose, bro,
we'll go down together. You know how many times we've gone down together in CEDH games? It will just keep happening.
That was once.
It's been twice. No, 3 times. At least 3. Yeah.
Hold on.
Salt Fest, Galaxy Con.
Oh, our first game ever, Salt Fest. Sure. Was that the Niv Mizzet game, or was that the TNT game?
I don't know. I don't even know what deck it was, but we got Thorkel console like turn 2.
Yeah, it was turn 3. It was turn 3 from the fucking Stacks TNT deck, and I was like, sure, brother, you got it.
And then it was the top 4 match in the last day of Galaxy Con. What was the third one?
So not been that? How many times have we played against each other? It's been 4?
In tournaments, we have those 2. We have the time that I literally almost scooped up to you and then one on top of you. With
I don't want to hear that shit. No, I don't hear that shit. I don't hear that shit.
And then we had the game that you pissed off Chris. You couldn't win and then immediately cast a Nos.
No. He tried to make me promise I couldn't win, and I said, I'm not promising shit.
I said,
and then I cast a Nos.
Couldn't win at that time.
Oh, that's true.
And then top decked a Nos.
Yeah, that was unfortunate for him.
On his
what can you do, right? Yeah, on his birthday too.
On his birthday.
Oh god.
Yeah, that might be it. That might be our only actual tournament games. We have a ton of casual games against, but not a lot of tournaments.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't ever want to see Voja again.
Bro,
I'm so sick of that.
Bro, did I tell you about New York? Well, I played it at the Redemption.
How'd it go?
I went 2-1.
Good. You made some money.
I even beat Jorman on it.
That you did tell me. You did tell me you beat Jorman on Voja.
I was laughing my ass off in that game because there's no world in which I should have won that fucking game. No world, and then it was like,
I forever wear the badge of I won a game on Voja without ever casting Voja.
This is true. That was kind of wild.
Annual fucking stacks. like
Hey, that's why it's built like that, though, right? Because you got the fallback stacks plan if Voja goes awry. So, and it works. You showed me it actually worked. So,
it's possible. It's not good, but it's...
Sorry, I put Emrakul in the deck now. So,
oh, Christ!
All right,
what's your you get to go back and back here with number 6 and number 5. What are you looking at?
All right. So my number 6, we just were talking about it. Marnius is where I put Marnius at number 6. And I think Marnius was always one of those decks where it was always right on the cusp. It was always a step below Tivet for the longest time because it was just missing cleaner win cons. You had some different ones like Friends of Gadgeteer and Basalt. You know, you always had Thoracle Console, but it was really missing just that extra piece to take it over the edge. And it finally got it with Stride Hanger Automaton. As soon as that card got printed and combos really nicely with Warren Soul Trader, now it has basically a Necro in the command zone that you're kind of utilizing because you're now manually storming off in your deck. And that was really the card I think that helped put it over the edge. I think also we always had considered running Tivet in the 99 and never could justify it because putting clues on the table in the pre-Dockside era was a very, very bad idea. You just didn't have the mana to crack them. And so you just end up feeding whoever the Dockside player was, and then they just win. And so those strategies now being unlocked have now, I think, put Marnius well ahead. And I think it also helps that Tim basically does what Tim does, and he just throws down Thoracle Console basically every chance he has. I think the vast majority of his wins, from what I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but from his own Twitter and from what I've heard, that's his strategy. He's going to throw down Thoracle Console, then if he gets stopped, he switches to that mid-game Marnius plan, which is still very, very powerful. There might not be a more powerful combination in the format, even amongst like blue farm and stuff, as Marnius and Teish. Like that combination is disgusting. It basically will win the game in a rotation or two just because of how potent and powerful it is. I love the deck. I loved the deck for a long time. It was just very slow in the pre-Dockside meta, so I had moved off of it. But I actually was helping a buddy of mine rebuild it, and he's been playing it and enjoying it a lot. So I do believe in the deck again. I think it's very, very strong. I think it is the best expert deck right now. Tivet players can go fuck yourselves. Finally, this is our moment. It's been a long time coming. The amount of Tivet players who would be like, why fucking run Marne? It's when you can just run Tivet. Now we have a reason. We're here. We're being heard. So I think, for those reasons, I think Marne is really strong right now.
Just to be clear, are you saying that Marne has finally got better than Tivet once you put Tivet in your 99? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Okay, so people who don't know this, if you make a clue, because of the way Investigate works with Tivet, you actually draw that many cards with Marnius and Tivet on the battlefield. So if you Investigate and everyone else chooses clue, you will actually draw like 5 cards off of that, which people did not know that interaction existed. It was actually debated for a very long time within the Marnius chat, to the point where people were reaching out to like Mark Rosewater to get clarification on if this is how it worked. And then the clarification finally came back. So you only get the 1 card draw off the treasures, but the clues are like really powerful. It's just you didn't want to do clues, Dockside. So that really
just to clarify, the reason that it is that way is because the way that Tivet is worded, it's everyone picks X or everyone picks Y, and if X is treasures, it's just make that many treasures. But if X is Y, it's investigate that many times. And it doesn't just say make that many clues; it specifically says you investigate that many times. And investigating is each trigger.
Yeah, because it replaces the word you use. So you would say it's not I create 5 clues; it's you create a clue 5 times. Is the way it was explained to us, and that is why you get it the way you get it. Which is it's nutty. It's really nutty, but they become a very powerful engine together as well.
And if someone just wants to give me a bunch of treasures, that's also okay.
Yeah, like you don't lose either way, right? They're like everyone will be like, "Oh, give them treasures, give them treasures." You're like, "Sick! I make mana, and then I still get to vote for myself twice and draw 2 cards." Like, I still win. Like, there's no losing with the card. It's amazing.
Oh, it's phenomenal. It's been super, super good lately. I'm happy to see Marne is doing well, and it is really funny to look back on when we were at Heisenberg and I was talking to Sabretooth in between one of his rounds, and I was like, "Oh, how'd your round go?" And he goes, "Oh shit, bro, I won." I was like, "Oh man, how'd you get there?" And he goes, "Dude, you won't believe it. I found this like new super niche line that I'd never done before." And I was like, "Oh shit, like what'd you do?" And he's like, "Bro, I cast this called Thassa's Oracle." And then check this out. There's another one called Data Back.
Well,
he got me too. He was telling me. He really sold me on it.
That's awesome. Oh, that's funny. Oh shit.
Back to you. What's number 5?
Oh yeah, number 5. So this is where I put Magna. I actually play against this deck a lot more probably than you do because this meta in this area, the North Carolina, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia, South Carolina area, whatever, like this little 5-state region, They love Magna. Love Magna. You see it all the fucking time. You can see Turbo Magna, you see the Stacks Magna, and just it's every flavor and variation of Magna you can possibly imagine. Almost every time we play at like any of the AGL events where they do like Charlie's Collectibles down in Atlanta, every time I play those events, there is a buttload of Magnas. You'll see at least 15, 20 of them. There's a Magna in the top 4 at the Boyle. There's a Magna in the top 16. I just played it in New York. I see this deck all the time. And each and every time, it just really skews my play patterns. And this is why I rank the deck so high, because it's very resilient, right? They're going to play down their dinky dwarves, but they keep getting more and more cards printed into this deck that are just artifact dwarves. I swear, one day Magna is just going to be a deck full of artifact dwarves. It's just going to be shapeshifters. That's it. Artifact shapeshifters, the whole deck. I'm convinced at the rate Wizards is going. And that it just makes it more and more consistent and resilient the more and more these cards get printed. They do not need a lot to get going. They just got printed Lifecrafter engine, which is another big piece for them. It just seems like it's a deck that's going to be really, really tough to stop as it gets going. You really have to hone in on killing Magna at like the right moment, because I feel like if you kill it too early, then they're just kind of out of the game. And sometimes there's a reason you might not want another player out of the game. But if you kill it too late, you're just going to lose, because then they'll just come back and immediately make the 5 and then start popping off, and it's over, right? I mean, the clock elements being so easy to pull out and just win on the spot with just makes playing against the deck very frustrating sometimes, and just requires a lot more politicking at the table than I think you would see in a normal CEDH game.
Yeah, ton of respect for Mag. They keep getting so many ridiculous, but they get so many cards. They're one of the only decks in the format. They get cards that are only good for them and make them better as a deck, while literally doing nothing for the rest of the board, right? Like you can look at Sisay Deadpool in a similar way, but a bunch of decks also got Deadpool, right? Like it made Mardu Dargo better and a bunch of other Mardu decks better, and like that's great. Magna gets cards that just like you can improvise and make 5 treasures and like fucking. I'm like, what is this fucking shit, bro? Like
well, it was the stupid one that just got printed in Bloomborough. The one that it's like a scarecrow. Yeah. And then you put a card on the bottom of your deck, and it enabled an entirely like 4 new Magna lines. And it's like, what the shit? Like a 3-drop common.
They were playing Elixir of Immortality and shit, just so they like would be able to loop things. And now they're like, oh, we get to play an artifact that does all of that. Like you're like, I don't know, like, what the hell, dude? It's so annoying.
Oh, geez. Like I said, eventually the entire deck, they're just going to drop all their shitty dwarves, and it'll all be artifact dwarves. Eventually.
I do not like Magna as a deck at all. like,
and that's the other frustrating. Like when I've had this conversation before, when you talk about like decks that are predatory at the table, like they're going to play on their own game plan and their own axis, and they're basically, if you don't really touch them, they're never going to touch the rest of the table. They're not going to interact. They just don't give a shit. They're very, very parasitic. I think Magna is among the most parasitic decks in the format. Some of the stacks builds maybe a little less so, because at least they kind of can interact. But then all their stacks pieces are just designed just to fuck you and then enable themselves. So you're just like, ugh.
Fuck it. I'm sorry. Well, a couple. You said you don't want to take Magna out of the game. Don't want them to be out of the game. Why? They're not going to help. Just take them out of the game. They're not a deck I care. Like maybe you want them there so the other decks is something to worry about sometimes. Sure, but like no, I'm fine to just take Magna out of the game. Fuck Magna. But also, I've never been more like annoyed internally than when like we need something to stop something and they're like, well, I can get a Godfarer statue. I'm just like, fuck off. Like it's so annoying. I can get a Portal of Phyrexia and screw him over. Like fuck off, honestly.
No, it's funny you say that. So this is why like I kind of give that caveat of like sometimes you don't want to take them out of the game. At the Boil 2, right? In that top 4 game, that's exactly how I got stopped the first time around. Like Andy, because of some of the politics that was going on, Andy knew I had Thorkel Consult in my hand. And so Magna literally said, hey, to stop him, I'll crack my 5 treasures and I'll get Godpharaoh's statue. And I was like, why? Like, and the Kidden players, of course, Kevin's like, that's fine with me. I'm kidding. Like, I'm mana for days. And Andy and I are looking at each other like, ew, no, what the fuck? like, yeah, it stops Thorkel Consult, but it also just stops me in general, right? Like, shit.
Yeah, and that's the problem. They put you in a lot of prisoners
not actually helping in any way.
Yeah. Ugh. But had they also not done that, right, then I just slammed Oracle Console on like turn 3 and the game's over. So it's like it is
the
more.
question. Did Magna win from that scenario?
No.
Did the other players win from politicking with Magna in that way?
Also, no.
Then who fucking cares? Like, it doesn't matter.
They made the game very annoying. It's what they did. Much more stressful than it needed to be. That's what I'm saying.
That's what I mean. It's the same shit about like when we were talking about Eureka, and I was like, it does the thing. It does all the things you want to do, and then it doesn't win. Magna does win. That's why I'm rating it highly, because like it can win the game. But when it gets into these shitty political situations of like I can get a Godfarer statue, I never see that working out in some kind of way that's positive for the table. It's not good.
Also, just a funny note, Lily at one of the tournaments recently hit a Godfarer statue off a Ragavan and then cast it. And Grixis with a Godfarer statue was hilarious to watch. Hilarious.
Fucking.
They're like, oh wait, I get to go fast and you can't stop me? This is sick.
Dude, my first ever Obnixilis top 16. I talked Pigeon out of casting his Godpharaoh statue on Magna. This is back when he was on Magna. Because I literally looked at him and I was like, can you kill Ob? And he was like, nah. And I was like, if you play that, I am swinging at you.
Talk about a big beater right to the face.
I love, dude, politicking on Obnixilis was my favorite politicking deck ever, because it was nothing like the politics I normally do on Talion or Kinnan or Rogthras or Nadu or whatever, where it's all very like interactive control faggots. All of my politics on Ob were, if you do that, I'm going to kill you. like that was. Bro, I talked people out of collector oofs. I talked about Adranits. I talked about everything, because I would just say, can you kill Ob? And they would go, no. I go, you're dead if you cast that.
Bro, why do you think I love Vocha so much? That's how I politics too. I'm like, you don't want to do that. Or this wolf's coming your way. And they're like, oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah. I don't need to get hit for 40 right now.
They're like, can you pay Ward 3? No? All right.
Yeah, but it was great because I talked about him casting Godfair statue and immediately untapped and won the game. It's like I'm not waiting anymore.
That's funny.
So good. And we made it to the top 4.
We have.
Top 4, I think, is the cemented, most obvious part of the episode here, where I think a lot of people know what decks are about to come up. But, you know, maybe we have them in different orders. I was totally a pussy in how I ranked a couple. You'll see it. It'll make sense in a second. At number 4, I have Tymna Thrasios. It's an amazing deck.
No.
There's really not that much to say about it. It is the infinite combos. You get your Swift Recon Devoted Druid, you get your Hazel's Devoted Druid, you get your Thoracle Consult, you get a lot of like 1-card combos that do weird things to win the game. You get to play just an incredibly busted pile of high card quality. The thing I hate about this deck, compared to all the other decks that you're going to see above it, is it is so interaction light, man. It is so good at winning the game. And a lot of people, for some reason, think it isn't that great at winning the game. This deck is awesome at winning the game. It is so bad at stopping other people from winning the game, though, and that's what I hate about it. It's actually a super proactive deck when you look at its card pool, right? Even when people don't play it hyper proactively, the way it functions with the cards it has is it is interaction light relative to the rest of the top here, and it is really, really good at winning the game, but it doesn't do it in a Rogsai fashion. It's definitely a bit slower than that. It is a lot of like card advantage setting itself up, but it doesn't help. It only hurts. And that's why it's the bottom of the top 4 for me, is I think it's the worst at stopping other people, but it's very good at protecting itself.
Yeah, and I think our ranking is actually going to probably speak a lot to our own particular play styles. I haven't ranked them tad bit higher, probably, obviously, but that might just be some personal bias going on there. But I don't think you're necessarily wrong. The difference, I think, with a lot of the TNTs is that there are a ton of different builds, and I don't want to talk too much about this because I'll get into it when I give my ranking. But I think there was just like one primary one for a minute there, but I think it's starting to branch back out, and you're starting to see like 4 or 5. So I think the deck is significantly more flexible than a lot of other decks, and I think that's also what makes it maybe just a tad bit more interesting than some of the others that are up here.
Yep. Well, you got it 4.
So my number 4 is actually Rogthras. And I will. The only reason I have it actually ranked here is because I think it's a very linear deck. Like, it's very, very good at what it's going to do, but it is very all in on the Cradle plan. Shockingly, though, it does not actually run a lot of interaction that shuts down some of the stuff that would shut it down. So, like, for example, Curse Totem. It only runs 4 pieces in the average Rog Thras list to actually deal with a Curse Totem. It only runs a handful to deal with like a Collector Oof or some of the other stuff that kind of comes in and it's going to shut it down, like a Lidvala, Drawn and Lidvala, or a Lidvala itself. There are not a lot of cards, I think, that really are as explosive as Roger, like we talked about a little bit with Rogside. But I think this deck, unlike TNT, and I think this is kind of where the difference between them are, is it comes down to explosiveness versus flexibility and maybe a little bit more consistency. Rog Thras is very, very explosive, but it also can whiff sometimes on its flips because it's very much relying on that Kitten activation, or not Kitten, sorry, the Thrasis activation over and over and over again. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily lend itself to like the highest quality of card pool or the greatest rate of return. You really need some other pieces to set it up. And so I think just because it needs a lot of moving parts, which sometimes plays to its advantage, right? Because all the moving parts are so tiny, you're never really sure, like, do I want to interact with this moving part or that moving part, other than Cradle itself, which even sometimes doesn't work with the Earthcraft. But I think a lot of times that is the only reason I have the deck kind of a little bit lower is I think in the hands of a very skilled pilot, they're very good at talking their way around some of that stuff. But the average pilot that I think will pick up this deck is going to see it's very linear. It's a little bit harder to talk their way out of it, especially as more and more players are picking it up and understanding how the lines work and everything. Like for example, I know Ouroboros was a card was not on a lot of people's radar until this deck kind of picked it up and started winning with it a lot. And now everyone kind of is treating it as no longer a value piece, which is I think how people kind of saw it before. But now this is a winning condition on the same like realm as like a Grand Abolisher or a Voice of Victory or some of those type of cards. And so I think the deck is just doesn't have necessarily the same resiliency comparatively to some of these others that are at the top here. But I still think it's a very, very strong deck.
Here, listening to that. Long grass at 4. Oh God. I disagree with you on some things there.
I figured you would.
Yeah. I'll get to, because my number 3 and number 2, I have to. And I'm aware that this is a cop-out. I'm aware that and you can make fun of me, and I don't care, because my number 3 and number 2 combined are Kinnan and Roggrass.
I could not decide, dude. I went back and forth on this so much.
I really was like, which one is better? I need to take a stance here, and I just outright could not take a stance. I'll talk about them each individually. I'll do Roggrass first because you just talked about it, so it funnels it a little bit better here. This deck is fucking wild. This deck is every single thing that's wrong with Yoshi Thras is not wrong with Roggrass. It is faster to set up. It is more explosive early, and it is more resilient late in terms that it has more different axes to win the game on. As you've seen in some of the videos that have come out with me playing recently on YouTube, and you might have seen on some of my various streams and such, I've won a lot of games where I have these incredible Rog Thras board states full of creatures with my Cradle plan going, and then I get board wiped or I get Culling Ritualed or something happens, and then I say, okay, cool. How about this Underworld? How about this Song of Creation? I have these various different lines to go through in the game, and even in my top 16 game at the Heisenberg, I was Supreme Verdicted and then deluged again, and it didn't fucking matter because this deck can reset itself up so much more efficiently and turn its engines on just so much more quickly. And it plays a ridiculously deep interaction package. I am on so many forms of interaction. I did a count the other day, and it was like 33 different cards in this deck function in some kind of interaction, most of them being instant speed, most of them being counter spells or removal. Like it is deep on an interactive mindset. And that's the way I like to play this deck, is I play it like a control deck. It has the capability of doing the turbo storm off, so it has that flexibility built into it, and I can take advantage of those windows when they present themselves. But the deck is so powerful, and I think it's so resilient. And the real point I disagree with you on is I don't think it's linear. I think it's incredibly flexible. And I think if you tried the deck, you'd see that a lot more. The deck is wildly flexible on what it's able to do. But very specifically, because it is so interaction dense, it's not as locked into trying to win the game in a certain time frame. Where, well, going back to what I said about TNT,
like TNT just doesn't have as many ways to stop people, doesn't have as many ways to properly interact with people. And so sometimes it's kind of in that position of I'm just going to keep casting my silence effects and try and go for the win. Roggrass doesn't need to do that. It's much better at just winning on top. It's much better at just being opportunistic. And it makes so much mana that the Thrasios is playing for card advantage on top of the Ristic plans or Tymna plans or whatever else anyone else wants to do. It's super valid because I'm often in these game states of I'm just holding up my mana, I'm holding up my interaction. I can do that if I have to. And if you don't make me use it, I'm just going to draw more cards and keep turning. And I've been loving the deck lately. I've been playing it for almost 2 months now. And it's one of my favorite decks to pilot of all time.
Yeah, I think it's not that, like I said, I don't think the deck is bad. I think the issue I've had with it is I have seen it hard stopped, right? I think when I look at the average pilot, right, and I'm not talking about like what your skill and your politicking level are, but when I see this deck in most other tournament rounds, it is a deck that is doing the thing. It's doing it very fast, and it's very scary. But they're having trouble, I think, getting to the point where it's like, how do I convert all this mana into a win? And a lot of times it's, are they just missing on Thrasios? Because I've seen that a lot, right? They're just whiffing on the Thrasios clips. Or is it, there's stats pieces out that are starting to stop me, or is it the table has started working together to hold me down? And I think the average pilot is starting to struggle with that and navigating through that realm. I don't think it's quite to like Kinnan level, which we'll talk about here in a bit, but I do think it is a struggle for the average pilot to navigate through some of those politicking decisions, because I do think this deck, more than maybe any other deck in the format currently, arguably Kinnan, is table threat number one. And this is the deck people are going to come after very quickly, very early. People are already slotting in board vibes for it. They're reframing their entire decks around stopping this particular deck. And I think because of that, I think personally, it remains to be seen how resilient the deck manages to be. Because the average Roger Thrasios list that I've seen is not packing quite as much interaction as yours is. Some of them are not taking Underworld Breach. So a lot of those decks are really all in on that Thrasios plan or on the Stronger Creation plan, which has its own issues. Some of which, it just whiffing again on cards or running into a Ristic study, or there's some different issues there. But I think at the end of the day, it's still a very powerful deck. I think it easily could have been number 3 for me. It's just kind of a flip-flop on TNT. I valued consistency and flexibility a little bit more over the explosive nature that Roggrass has.
I just want to say something really clearly to the Roggrass community. For the love of God, play Underworld Breach. The card is so good. It is so broken. It gives us resiliency. When you get board wiped, you just, oh, cool. Now my graveyard is full and I can win with Breach. Just do that. Really good.
There's an argument to be made, right, that almost every deck in red should at least run Breach as a value piece, and even if that's all it is in your deck. But Breach is such a busted card. It might be the best card in all of CEDH.
You know my number 2 and 3 combined are Kinnan and Roggrass. I talked about Roggrass. Give me your number 3, and then we'll get to it afterwards.
Yeah. So my number 3 is TNT. And again, I think, like I said, we just basically flip-flopped our Roggrass and TNT is really what it comes down to. And again, what I think is really strong about the deck, and obviously this deck is near and dear to my heart. I've won a lot of games on this deck. I've piloted this deck quite a bit, and I've had a lot of success on it. And so this deck is near and dear to my heart. It is a very hard deck to pilot. And I think that is a turnoff for the deck sometimes. The decision trees on the deck are very, very tough at times. It's not always clear on what the right decision in the game is. And sometimes you do make the wrong decision when you're going kind of down your decision tree, and that can hurt you in the game. But I think the deck has a lot more consistency than some of the other Thrasios piles that are out there. The access to black and white give you really clean closing end games, because you can silence them, and then the black just, those tutors that can go get pretty much anything you want. The Hazel Brewmaster combo is a little bit harder to interact with than people realize. There's a lot of times where players will miss the interaction point and kind of don't understand the timing behind it. And then that allows you to sometimes sneak wins in that you should probably not have otherwise had. Of course, you still have access to the best win con in CEDH and Oracle Console, or at least the fastest win con. So you can always slam in your face, really quickly. And obviously having the silence effects makes it really easy to do. The green tutors also just make a lot of the decks smooth some of those issues over, because you're pulling out a lot of your powerful creatures really easily. Nature's Rhythm gave the deck some really, really cool lines, along with Gifts Ungiven. And Gifts Ungiven, out of all the decks, this might be one of the few decks that can really abuse Gifts Ungiven, outside of Blue Farm and Savine, because there are about 6 different lines that the deck can use. What's also cool about the deck, I think, is that it has probably more than any other deck in CEDH, there is not a solved list, right? The list that I took to the boil was not a solved list. It was a list that I felt comfortable playing in the meta at that point, but I'd also struggled on that same list. I lost a lot at Royal Rumble, but then came back and readapted the list and started to do a lot better. But it is certainly not a solved list. We're starting to see Razakith lines come back around. I've seen some other really strong pilots like Max P have had some success on it. So there are a lot of really good TNT pilots that have a very different lists that are all having a lot of success on the list. And so I don't think it's a solved list by any stretch of the imagination, certainly not as much as Blue Farm. And I think that's what's kind of cool about it, is there's still a lot of flexibility within that, what it can do right now. Like Max is saying, some of those lists are packing interaction. Mine used to. My current one is actually more interaction heavy than it used to be, just because I was finding that I was losing a lot more in those early games and needed to kind of clean that up in practice. And since I went up on interaction, the decks performed a lot better for me. And so I think the deck is.
You say interaction heavy. Does that take it to more or less than the average deck?
I think it takes it to about the average, right? Like we're never going to be as interaction heavy as like a Blue Farm, right? Just having REB and Pyro already puts them in like a tier above that we just can't access. I'm not going to run bad counter. Yeah, exactly. Those two, right? Like I'm not going to run bad counter spells just to have more counter spells. Like there is a limit on what I'll put in the deck. I think Dispel starts to get into the realm of like what a bad counter spell looks like. I think it's good enough still, but I don't want to run Miscast, right? I think Miscast is really bad in the format right now. I don't want to run Spell Pierce. I don't want to run I'm not going to run True Blue counter spell. I'm not going to run any 2-drop counter spells that are, not necessarily the greatest. I don't want to run Mana Drain. And so your pool starts to limit on what you can even put in the deck. And so I think I'm running the best interaction pieces that work for the deck, and is running as much of them as I can right now. And I think that's helping smooth over some of those issues.
Totally fair. I am a little shocked to see the timeline. Win the biggest tournament in CDH history, level 2 on TNT, and then you rank it number 3.
I think it's a good deck, but it's not the best deck, right? I think it has its weaknesses, and a good pilot has to know how to mitigate those weaknesses. And you can see that a lot of players are really struggling on the deck because it is such a complicated deck. I think Blue Farm, like I've been playing Blue Farm for the last few weeks, and it is a significantly, this might piss people off, but it's a significantly easier deck to pilot, I think. It's very
easy as fuck.
I think it is much easier, but I don't think it's as flexible. That's what I found. I think Blue Farm has a lot of, it is flexible, but it's not quite as flexible. TNT's, I found I was missing a lot of what TNT can do, the way it approaches the meta. I was missing green tutors, I felt like a lot in my games. You were very all in on card draw, which is cool, but there were also a lot of games where I felt like my mana got kind of a little bit more compressed, and I never really feel like I had mana problems in TNT. Sometimes it was like the colors were more the issue, but I never felt like mana production as a whole was an issue. Every time I played Blue Farm lately, I feel like I'm always a little pinched for mana. Maybe not like to the point where it's a problem, but just enough to where I have to really think about my lines a little bit more clear. I can't just I can't play cards and just be like, shoot, like I didn't have the mana to do it, right? Like you just have to be really conscious about every card that comes out of your hand. TNT, it's like I've got a glut of mana. I can afford to dump some cards here and then just pass turn and set up for the go around because I've got the resources to do so, and I've got a lot of flash enablers that work really well in the deck and kind of move along with the rest of the game plan. So I think just from that perspective, right? Like I think it's a strong deck. I think it's very incredibly hard to pilot. I think it is one of the hardest decks to pilot. And I'm not coming from a place of bias. I've heard a lot of players talk about this of like, it is hard. It's very complex, and the decision trees are very extensive on it. And I think that's why its ranking has dropped a little bit.
Totally fair. I hate Blue Farm.
as spoiler alert, you're probably going to rank it number 1.
I don't want to talk.
All right, let's get
number 2/3. I have the other half of the one I talked about. I have my sweet baby of a deck, Cannonbonder Prodigy. It really is almost like if I had a nickel for every time I talked.
I don't think I've in my life I've talked about more than Kin and Bonder Prodigy. The amount of fucking hours I've talked about this goddamn deck. I love Kinnan, though. I love Kinnan. Not to toot my own horn, but my variant of Kinnan was the main Kinnan build around list, something between me and Ian's, which me and Ian's are on the same overall game plan. And that's kind of how it was for most of the last 2 years. So when talking about Kinnan, it was really clear what version of Kinnan you were talking about and what you were evaluating. But in the last 6 months, that has changed. Waffle's been absolutely cooking with his variant of Kinnan, which a quick explanation of the differences here. My version of Kinnan leans much more onboard control. It leans a lot more. I almost want to say like proactive stacks to some weird way of putting it. Where like I love my Thorn Mammoth's effects, and I love my Glenelender just sitting there on the board, and I love my Void Winnower shutting down my opponent. I love those cards, and I think they're amazing in the deck, and I'm nowhere near cutting any of them. And Waffle's version is much more cutting out all the fat, essentially making it so Kinnan's activated ability is not as much as a primary game. Where a lot of the times I'm still mulliganing for card advantage based hands. I'm still trying to accomplish that. But my goal was hold up my mana, interact as needed, spin Kinnan, get value for free afterwards. Waffle's deck doesn't really do that as well. It can still do that, and he still has Consphinx and Hullbreaker and Tidespout and Nezahal. It has some great hits in there, but it has a much lower density of them, so his Kinnan activation plan isn't really good. He's entirely committed to the risk. In the same way we were talking about Rogai versus Rongsai, he's that version of Kinnan versus his version of Kinnan. He is on Ristic, Mirror Maid, Copy Enchantment, Commandeer to get more of those effects, Clever Impersonator, Fairy Mastermind, Polywog at times. He was on Steel Enchantment at some point. Like, he is so committed to obtaining card advantage in that deck, and his whole philosophy is Kinnan is a mana battery. I have so much mana. If I can draw so much cards and I have so much mana, I will win the game. And that has been working for him very, very well. I do not think it is easy to pilot. I think his variant of Kinnan really, really falls into what he does well as a pilot, which is ball taking out, right? He is super big on convincing other people to use interaction and being able to hold all his stuff in hand. And that's a super effective strategy for winning the game when you can do it in a super friendly way like he does. But it's a hard thing for people to emulate. And I've seen a lot of people try Waffle's variant of the deck to very, very limited success because they just can't emulate that style of politicking to be able to develop this much resource in hand to go for a very safe win, not so much protected by what's on board, but by what's protected within your hand. And the difference between that version and my version is my windows of opportunity are much more forced open by my deck creating this ridiculous onboard situation of I have a Glenelender, I have a Wandering Archaic, I have a Trinosphere. There's nothing you can do to stop me. And that's kind of the real big difference between the two versions is I'm a lot more on-board development, a lot more grindy advantage, and he's really just full committed to card advantage and mana and being able to snipe a lot of instant speed when on top of what other people are doing. But overall, the deck is amazing on both lines. I do try and warn people against going for something in the middle because it really is one of those things where I'm so committed to my strategy and he's so committed to his that the decks are very strong individually because they're following that axis. And if you try and build something in between the two, it kind of makes it just weaker than both if you went all the way in either direction. So I do caution against trying to do that. But Kinnan as a deck, what I love about it is I think Kinnan is the only commander in the format that hits all four primary categories of what a commander could be to me. It is card advantage, it is mana advantage, it is a combo piece, it is an outlet for a combo. It does fucking everything. like on a 2-mana commander, it's busted as hell. It's super resilient. It wins through Ristic Study because it can happily grind a game plan that doesn't cast spells. It goes infinite in a billion ways. It doesn't care about that many stacks pieces. Like it cares about them, but it can work around them super, super well. It's able to be proactive and win on turn 2, turn 3. It's able to play the mid-range really well. It's able to win late incredibly well. The deck is good at every phase. The deck is good in every situation. It has so few truly bad matchups, and it's incredibly powerful no matter which direction you're taking with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think Kinnan has always been one of those decks where it's just very strong. It's always going to be very strong. Extra mana, and from the command zone for a cheap body that also can convert that mana into value. It's incredibly powerful. An incredibly powerful commander. I think there was a moment where you could probably have ranked this deck a lot lower. I think people were really struggling, kind of in that post Dockside era, to like try to figure out the deck. The good pilots had figured it out quickly, but your average pilot was still very much struggling on the deck. And I think it's kind of come back around, right? I think what Kinnan at one point was starting to get into like the low teens in terms of conversion. percentage, and I think that's changed a lot. And part of that's because of Waffle, but I think the deck overall is just really well situated in the meta. It's very, very powerful in this meta. It's like we talked about, right? There's a lot of decks that get kind of mana choked right now. So unless you're kind of all in on those cradle strategies, you're one of the decks that's probably just struggling just a tad bit for mana. This is a deck that's never going to struggle for mana. They're always going to have access to it. They're always going to have access to a lot of it. It's probably one of the few decks that can grind really, really well into the mid game, like really well. Not kind of, we talked a little bit about Malcolm Vile, can be resilient and grind into that mid game, but Kinnan is going to outperform in the mid game, but also can slam the door very quickly in your face, as we saw Waffle do in Heisenberg on turn 2 with the right cards. Like, it does not take a lot for Kinnan to immediately convert to a win if the window's open and ready to go. And so I think that makes the deck, it's always going to make the deck very dangerous. Every time I sit down against a Kinnan, I know it's going to be a miserable game.
I've played thousands of games. Do you know how many times I've had a turn 2 natural win like that?
What? I'm gonna say
like fucking three. Like 3 in a tournament. I've had that. I have about, I want to say, I've got a couple hundred tournament games on Kinnan, and I think I have 1 or 2 turn 2 wins in tournaments. I've had a good collection of turn 3s, but turn 2 is a rare one.
Yeah.
Really, really rare one.
But even in turn 3, but even turn 3, right? Like, that's still pretty fast for a deck that is more control oriented, more like, I want to get to the mid game and just beat you down in the mid game. Hey, turn 3, sometimes that's rock size window, right? But you're sitting there like, oh, I can do the same thing. There's not a lot of decks that can do that aren't kind of trying to go all in on like a Thoracle strategy, right? Like, Kinnan just can set it up naturally. And then, oh, my Basalt got countered. Well, I'm just going to keep doing what I was doing anyway and just grind you into the dust. And what are you going to do, right? But it is a deck that I legitimately fear when I sit at a table, especially like TNT is my main deck. It's a deck that can do everything we want to do, but does it faster, more consistently, and its creature base is more explosive. The only thing I think that holds this deck back is fear, and the fear from the players at the table. It is not a deck that is ever going to fly under the radar. Like, we've talked about some of these decks, okay, just hold the counter spell and you stop it. Everybody is traumatized by Kinnan. If you've played in CEDH for more than a month, Kinnan has traumatized you. And there's not a single player that is going to let Kinnan get away with its nonsense. And so I think a lot of games, and I kind of think this speaks to your experiences, Max, I think this deck requires a certain level of politicking. It requires a certain level of politicking skill, but I think it also brings out sometimes, and I've seen this locally, I've seen this at bigger tournaments, you kind of saw it at Heisenberg. I think it sometimes brings out an aggressive nature of politicking, because Kinnan players have to be a little bit more aggressive with defending their Kinnan. And I think, a lot of people kind of talked about like that game with Waffle and Tim, Waffle and Gold Saber too. It's about like how aggressive the politicking started to get and all the deal making that went in there. And I think that kind of speaks to my experience as well. Whenever I've seen Kinnan at the table, there's probably not a more salt-inducing card than this commander in terms of like the way the board interacts with it, the way the table interacts with it, the way players see it, and then are trying to interpret basically where it is, right? Because at 7 mana, is it really a threat yet? Okay, but 7 mana with, let's say, I don't know, a Nezal on the board, how big of a threat has it become? Right? Like it's one of those cards where it's really hard to assess correctly in the board state of where it is, because you just don't know what those flips are going to be. And I think that is always going to then require a very specific amount of politicking and a correct level of politicking that I think is very hard to get right. I mean, you yourself have struggled to stay kind of within that line sometimes. I think I've seen Waffle struggle online to stay within that line. I've actually had a couple of local players who've reached out to me for politicking coaching because they've struggled to stay within that line. And I think from that perspective, that's one of the only things that holds that deck back, is it just requires that kind of politicking sometimes to actually get it to reach its full potential.
That's super fair. Podcast is I've felt the need to politic. Like, I haven't felt the need to like really aggressively politic nearly as much as this deck as Kinnan is, because Kinnan just has so many scary cards. And I've played with Waffle for years now. I know the guy super, super well, and definitely his politics have gotten more aggressive on Kinnan than they have been on any other deck I've seen him. Like, that's absolutely accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I've not talked to the guy much, right? I only just kind of recently started kind of reaching out to him for some different stuff, and he's always been super, super nice. And I don't think that Heisenberg game is like
great human.
Yeah, I don't think that Heisenberg game is like a good snapshot of who he is, right? But I think the amount of comments you saw where people were talking very negatively about him, it kind of just reminded me of like what happened with you as well, right? Like I think Kinnan and the fact that I've had people reaching out to me about coaching on it who are saying like, "Hey, you're unfun to play with because of Kinnan or because of the way you politic on Kinnan." I just think that the deck starts to lend itself to a very specific politicking style because it is such a threat and is a deck that people don't know how to play around because there's so much unknown factors with it because of the flips and the way the decks can be constructed. And no two Kinnan decks can really be the same, right? Sometimes you're on yours, sometimes you're on Waffle, sometimes you're on some weird amalgamation of just random crap you found in a drawer and threw together, right? Players are very scared of this deck. They're very traumatized by this deck. And I don't think there's a deck in the format that has the same type of visceral reaction that's negative as a Kinnan player, as a Kinnan player.
I don't know, bro. I've been getting the same reactions on Rog Draft nowadays. People are so sick of this deck already. It was so funny. Like a month ago or a month and a half ago or 2 months ago now, when I picked up Rog Draft for the first time, what I loved about it was like, oh, they were just letting my shit resolve with like no conversation because it's all this diddly little, you know what I mean? Like no one gives a shit. It's just little tiny irrelevant pieces. So like, sure, whatever, you can have that. And now it's like every time I pull out Rockfast, people are like, oh, I'm so fucking sick of this deck. Fuck everything. Besage you your Cradle when you have no creatures on board. I'm like, what is happening, dude? Like, what is?
I've been testing Assassin's Trophy because I was so sick of that deck. Like, legitimately, that's where we're at. That is where we are at.
I do love that. My top 16 came at Heisenberg. All in, good buddy of mine. His from deck that him and his buddy brought. They play against so much Rockdrass back home, and they played against John Vick for years. So he's been playing Rockdrass for years. Their blue farm deck is specifically designed to not lose to Rockdrass. They're the people who are on Supreme Verdict and Deluge and like everything to possibly deal with Rockdrass, and still got there. Still got there through it. But yeah, Kinnan's great. I imagine Kinnan was your number 2 after this conversation.
Yeah.
Anything else you would like to say about Kinnan?
No, like I said, I think it's a good deck. It's always going to do the thing, but it's always going to struggle because of the stuff we mentioned. So,
unfortunately, that only leaves one deck that could possibly be our number 1.
Shocker, we agreed, right? Shocker,
bro. I could get into a car accident, come out of the hospital high on morphine, immediately pick up a deck, and still win a tournament with this. It is the most boring sack of a fucking really good card garbage and card advantage you could ever dream of. It is the partner pairing of Timna and Crom. Congratulations. You are so good at casting a Ristic Study, a Mystic Remora, and an Esper Sentinel. You don't have to tutor for Doxen anymore, so now you tutor for Smothering Tithe instead. And then you cast a Grand Abolisher and you win the game. I'm so proud of you for figuring out those complex, brain-inducing play patterns, you boring sack of garbage. Like, it is so good at what it does. I'm so sick of this deck. Please ban Timna for the love of fucking God. I hate this deck, if you can't tell. I have played it in one event ever, and it was blind sending it. My first ever game on Blue Farm was round 1 of a tournament just for funsies, see what it was like, and it was so boring to play this deck for an event. I get that it's good. I know that it's good. There's a reason I'm ranking it at number 1. It is so consistent at doing exactly what it wants to do, which is draw cards and win the fucking game. It's great at that. But for the love of God, how do you? We're here to play a fun game. We're here to play a cool, interesting game. How do you, with a clear conscience, say, "Oh yeah, man, I love Blue Farm. I love Timden and Grom. Nothing gets me going like fucking doing the same goddamn thing every fucking game." I don't get it. I just fucking honestly. So boring, dude. It was cool when it was on Brina for a little bit, maybe. Like I don't know.
Like, hey, we brought some spice. Our spice was one card.
Dude, the amount of times that like even pre-ban, post-ban, it doesn't matter. And someone's like, "Oh man, I got a spicy Blue Farm list for you," and I'm like, "Oh man, send it to me." And it's like, I added Professional Face Breaker, or like, I'm on Delny. Like, cool, bro. What are you fucking? Wow, what a trailblazer you are. What a revolutionary. I don't fucking know.
Oh God, it's so true. It's so true.
Spicy Blue Farm means they added one card that might be mildly suboptimal, and it changes nothing. Like I remember when fucking Snake won Mox Masters on it in that top 4. He was on Sardian Avenger for the tournament. It's like one fun throw it. After the tournament, people were like, "Oh man, is this the tech now?" And he was like, "I literally didn't see it the entire event." Like,
it's always how it is, right? You're like, I put in one card just to do it, and then you'll never see it.
I put in the one Cephalid Empress and Kinnan for exactly the Mox Master Invitational to try it out and never saw it.
Yeah, I mean, what else is there to say about Blue Farm, right? Like, I've been playing it the last few weeks just to. People ask me like to figure out what the difference between it and why like TNT was struggling, why TNK is doing super well. So I picked it up, and I can honestly tell you why. It's just so linear. Like the game plan is the same. You got rocks at the table, doesn't matter. I'm still going to go for Ristic Study, and maybe I'll just try to have a piece of interaction. You got. It doesn't really matter what deck is at the table, right? At the end of the day, your game plan is still Ristic Study first, everything else second. You'll figure it out along the way. I don't even think this deck needs Nas or Necro. You probably win without either of them. Sometimes I think they're just fucking detriments to the deck, honestly, because the amount of times I've whiffed on my Nas lately has been insane. But like in all seriousness, the deck is so consistent at just doing what it wants to do. Tymna and Crom paired together functions very, very well. As long as you're casting them, swinging them, and you have a Ristic Study on the board, you're gonna find the win. Like there is not really much of a decision tree from what I've seen. Yeah, I have been shocked with how linear the deck is. Like we talked about Rockbass being linear. You can definitely make an argument, right, that this deck is maybe the most linear deck in the format. You're not doing a lot of spice. The deck list is almost solved. I think you're arguing over like 5 to 6 cards maybe on average. And honestly, let's be real, right? If you're arguing about 5 cards, those last 5 cards in CEDH deck, they don't matter. I have long argued probably 85 to 90 cards in a CEDH deck matter, and those last 10 you can fill with whatever bullcrap you wanted, and it would not matter. Would not matter. And Blue Farm may be the greatest example of that. Like people have argued over Darcy. Let's win with it and without it. People have argued over, like he said, Delny. Let's win with it or without it. Like it just doesn't fucking matter.
I'm just gonna bring the mic in whenever I have something really important. If you see a Blue Farm deck that doesn't have Heuristic Study and they have a Tymna and that's their game plan, kill the fucking Tymna. It's so good. It completely stops them. Why do people not do this? Just kill the fucking Tymna.
Legitimately, right? You can never justify because you're always like, I gotta hold it for the win or I gotta hold it for the scary thing. And then they're like, oh, Tymna's not that scary. It's only drawing 3 cards a turn. And you're like, wait, buddy, it's 3 cards a turn. Like, let's count here. 3, 6, 9. He's winning. It's over. Like, it's done.
Do you know how frustrating it is? Like, I've literally seen a Blue Farm draw 3 cards on their Tymna attack, and then I play a Seedborn with 6 mana in my Rogthras deck where I'm getting 1 card I'm paying 4 mana for in each person's turn, and they're like, gotta go, have to obliterate this motherfucker, blow all of our interaction to do it, and I'm like, what is going on here?
It is one of the mysteries of the universe, right? That Blue Farm gets away with murder. It does not matter what other decks put on the table, right? Seedborn and TNT, not that scary. Like, legitimately, I'm drawing 1 card per turn in that rotation. A Ristic Study has a better rate than I do, generally, right? Like, on average, you're drawing 1 card, and with maybe like an extra mana or 2 to hold up, right? It's scary. Sure, I'm not going to deny that, but then they'll be like, oh, Blue Farm will draw 5 cards off Ristic Study, then get 3 more on their turn, and then, they'll play an Esper, and they'll draw cards off that, and then they'll, you're like, what is happening? Like, how is nobody caring about this? And you'll point it out, and then everyone else will be like, yeah, but you've got 6 creatures on the board. And you're like, bro, there's 3 dorks, a Bowmaster token, and then like maybe 1 creature, and then Thrasios, right? And they're like, that's not a good board state. But it's like there's this disconnect that exists, this cognitive dissonance that exists between big board equals threat versus risk, Crom, Tymna, Ristic Study equals not threat. And I think that is legitimately why Blue Farm gets away with murder in this format. There's just an issue that exists between when you're looking at a board and you're assessing board state and you're not taking into account that cards in hand are somehow less scary than cards on board. And I think that literally comes down to why Blue Farm is so so able to get away with murder. Just
They call
obnoxious.
me they call me the Timness, bro. Like I never convince Timness out here. Dude, I do not let them have Timness. So sick of Timness.
Yeah.
Is what it is. But yeah. Anything else you want to say about any of the decks today?
No, man, this was fun. I appreciated this.
Yeah, I mean, thank you guys so much for listening to the triumphant return of the Colors of Crutch podcast. Once again, my name is Max Sternberg, also known as Wounded Satellite. With me, I've got Jordan Drake, aka SteeledDragon. We both individually offer CEDH coaching. Feel free to hit up either of those for that. You can find us on Discord, Twitter, any other place. We'll have all our links in the bottom below. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Anything else you want to say to the people here, Jordan?
Figured I'll plug both while I'm on both. So, yeah, also check me out on the other channel. So I'm more of an editor and producer, but the Idiot Brewing Company, we do gameplay and some other stuff. So we are probably way more casual than like majority of CDH channels because we goof off a lot more on there. But feel free to stop by and check it out as well.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.